magic. All right, shall we begin? Naruto asked, unsheathing his sword. The blade shone with an almost malevolent intensity in the sunlight. Mira Jane wasted no time. Take control, Satan's soul. A large magical seal appeared above her, enveloping her in a cocoon of purple energy. In less than a minute, Mira Jane appeared in all her take control glory. Urza began to glow brightly as a magic seal appeared around her. Re-equip flight armor. In an instant, Urza's usual clothes vanished, revealing an outfit that made Naruto raise an eyebrow. This new armor had very few armored parts. It was cheetah-patterned, and the outfit featured a large collar around Urza's neck and a tail hanging from the back of her shorts, both made of thick fur, as well as a pair of large cheetah ears adorning either side of her head. She wielded a pair of short swords with elaborate rapier-like guards shaped like rose thorns. Naruto wasted no time, interpreting her actions as the signal to begin. He launched himself toward Urza at incredible speed, hoping to force her to reveal her magic and fighting style. As he approached the redhead, his eyes widened as he watched her move out of his way at his current speed. That Urza appeared behind him, ready to unleash her flying kick when Naruto vanished from sight. She froze in surprise, allowing Naruto to land a spinning kick to her abdomen that sent her sprawling. Sensing Mira Jane approaching from behind, Naruto swiftly countered with a roundhouse kick that Mira Jane narrowly dodged. He evaded Urza's flying kick with a precise leap and parried her rapier with his sword. Channeling wind chakra into the leaf, Naruto shattered her swords with a single slash. As he threw a punch, Urza caught it and tried to throw him off balance by pulling him toward her. Instead of resisting, as she expected him to, he let himself be pulled and used the momentum to deliver a violent headbutt to Urza. Urza staggered from the blow, slightly disoriented. Naruto would have continued his attack, but he was forced to dodge the jets of dark energy Mira Jane was firing at him. He continued dodging the deadly projectiles and searched his clothing to activate the storage seal. When the pouch of kunai appeared, Naruto took 3 with his free hand and coated them with fire chakra. Re-equip Empress of Flames armor. Urza had returned to the battle. Her outfit changed once again. She now wore predominantly dark red armor with orange and black details, the former shaped like flames and the latter like dragon limbs. It consisted of 3 main parts: a breastplate that left her chest exposed, adorned with dragon wings, orange gauntlets, and greaves shaped like dragon claws. Her hair was styled in 2 long, high pigtails. Naruto threw the kunai towards her and activated one of his favorite jutsus without a seal. Kunai's fusion jutsu. Point 3 kunai instantly turned into 300, forcing Urza to concentrate on blocking the rain of blades. Naruto turned his attention to Mira Jane, whose fists were enveloped in a dark purple energy. Just out of curiosity, what kind of magic does Urza-san use? He asked casually as he ran toward her, leaning forward in a way that made him look like he was about to trip. Mira Jane stood her ground as Naruto approached, not answering his question. When he was within reach, he rolled away, dodging her side kick, and grabbed her tail. This action elicited an unexpected, though not entirely unpleasant, sound somewhere between a squeal and a moan. She turned to strike him, but felt his left foot slam into her face, sending her tumbling backward. Naruto used a substitution jutsu with one of the kunai Urza had deflected and appeared right in front of the mage. He attacked, confident of victory, when her red blade clashed with his in a shower of sparks that momentarily blinded her. Naruto advanced, demonstrating that Urza's impressive strength was no match for his own, and threw a punch that grazed her side. Urza leaned back and launched an upward kick, aiming for his jaw. With superhuman speed, Naruto swerved to dodge the kick and fell to the ground, simultaneously delivering a direct kick to Urza's face that knocked her down again. Evil Spark. The sound of the lightning prompted Naruto to coat his feet with wind chakra. Hearing Mirajane's footsteps, Naruto plunged his sword into the ground and used it as leverage to deliver a double kick to her ribs that left her breathless. He then unleashed a fire release, great fireball technique, that scorched her and sent her flying back a considerable distance. I should finish this now. Naruto lunged at the staggering Urza and drove his knee into her stomach. The blow knocked her unconscious, leaving her with far greater strength than before. Turning to Mira Jane, Naruto swung his sword at her with unerring speed and precision. Mira Jane barely saw the flash before being pinned to the nearest tree. Game, set, and match, Naruto said as he approached Mira Jane, whose body was bruised. Stopping in front of her, he smiled maliciously as he drew his sword. I won. Mira-chan. He whispered the last part, sending a shiver down her spine at the sound of his voice. Everyone watching the fight was on the verge of fainting. Naruto had only joined the guild the day before, and he'd already defeated 3 promising young members of Fairy Tail. Such strength was astounding for a 13-year-old boy. Natsu and Gray looked at Naruto with envy and admiration. They had dreamed of defeating both girls someday, and it was understandable that they felt jealous that the newcomer had managed it. However, seeing the 2 girls receive their just desserts was just as satisfying as the first option. In his office, Makarov sighed as he watched the end of the fight. Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Naruto. He thought this as he stared at the folder on his desk. The Magic Council had sent it to him during the fight, and Makarov knew Naruto would be furious about its contents. I fear that the Council's attempts to coerce you into joining them will have disastrous consequences. Unbeknownst to anyone except Naruto, a small paper figure chuckled as it flew out of the guild. Naruto hummed to himself as he returned to the guild, carrying the unconscious Urza Scarlet in his arms. He cradled her, her head resting on his bicep and supported by his right hand, while his left arm held her legs, allowing them to sway with each movement. The young redhead was breathing steadily, a thin trail of saliva escaping her parted lips and running down her jaw, pressed tightly against his body. Beside him, watching Urza in his arms with a strange expression of amusement, surprise, and mischief, was Kana, his new friend. The brunette walked to his left, content with the silence, though she occasionally let out a giggle. She found the situation amusing. Her new friend had not only defeated Natsu, an extremely stubborn and relentless fighter, but had also defeated the Fairy Tail discipline. To top it all off, he had defeated her and the demon Mira Jane, and quite easily, if she was honest with herself. Although she hadn't seen everything that happened in the fight, she had seen enough to realize that Naruto wasn't giving it his all. She didn't know why he was doing it. Boys always loved to show off, but she wasn't going to interfere. She was also surprised by how peaceful Urza seemed while she slept. Every time she saw her, the girl exuded an aura that warned others to behave properly. She rarely smiled. Sure, she often smiled sarcastically, especially on the rare occasions when she defeated Mira Jane, but she never showed a genuine smile. Since joining Fairy Tail, the only expressions Kana had seen on Urza's face were anger, indifference, self-importance, disapproval, and that slightly mocking glint typical of most girls her age. It was a welcome change from the armored girl, though Kana wondered why Urza seemed so comfortable in Naruto's arms. She heard a low growl to her right and suppressed the smile that threatened to appear, feigning a cough. Walking beside them was Mira Jane, understandably in a bad mood. Not only had she lost to Naruto, but her opponent had been carried out by him. He hadn't even used his eyes to defeat them both. He'd simply brought the unknown variable, Urza, or, in Myra's words, the stupid redhead, into the equation, extracted information from her while defending himself against the known variable, herself, and then treated them like little children. Looking back at the redhead, Mira Jane grimaced. We lost because we didn't fight him as a team. I let Urza fight most of the time, and only attacked when the opportunity arose. Naruto knows my abilities better than his, so I guess it's logical that he attacked her first. She glanced sideways at the blonde man as he began a conversation with Kana. Even so, that woman should have something different, he murmured. Flashback. Yeah, I'm glad I could help, but we need to get stronger. This mission showed me how lucky we were against that guy. If something like that happens again, we might not make it out alive, he said softly, gently stroking Myra's back. It was something he'd developed since Setsuna came into his life. Right now, though, we should enjoy having survived. Later, we'll train until we're strong enough to protect our people. Precious people? Mirajane asked, stepping back to look Naruto in the face. Naruto nodded. It's something a friend taught me before he died. A glimmer of understanding appeared in Mirajane's eyes, and Naruto continued. He believed that when a person has something important to protect, that's when they truly become strong. Upon hearing his words, Mirajane immediately thought of her brothers. Other images began to form behind them. Makarov, Kana, Laxus, Mikao, Natsu, Wakaba, Gray. Even Urza was on her list. Is there someone special you have? Once. He died a few years ago. They said nothing more as they separated from the hug, although Naruto still had his arm around Mirajane's shoulders. End of flashback. The memory that came to her was sudden and not entirely pleasant. The idea of stooping to asking Urza to work together was tempered by her newfound desire to become stronger to protect her family. After all, years of constant struggle couldn't end with a single battle, however revealing it might have been. Mira bit her lip in frustration. She would have to think about it later. Mirajane continued to let her thoughts wander. Elfman would be discharged from the hospital in the afternoon, probably around 3. That meant she had just over 8 hours to run a quick errand, buy some supplies, and prepare Elfman's favorite meal as a special welcome home gift. I hope nothing has happened to her. Lisanna could barely sleep from worry. If she received any more bad news, she might lose her mind. A light tap interrupted her, and she blinked. She found herself standing in front of the guild, with Naruto looking at her, an amused smile in his crimson eyes. A jewel for your thoughts? She shook her head, still thinking about how to surprise her little brother. It's nothing out of the ordinary. Elfman is being discharged from the hospital, and I want to throw him a surprise party or something like that. Naruto perked up at the news. Great. I wanted to ask you something. Would you mind if I came with you? Kana, having overheard enough of the conversation to pique her interest, joined in. What are you two talking about? She asked as she opened the door for Naruto. Muttering a quick thank you, the blonde boy walked past his unconscious passenger and headed for the guild's infirmary. I'll tell you later, Kana. I need to make sure Benaheim-chan gets a good rest, he said, pushing his way through the crowd that had gathered upon his arrival. He barely paid them any attention, preferring to quickly explain the training he was going to give the Strauss siblings. During his walk, he reviewed what he had seen of Mirajane's abilities and concluded that she and her siblings had the same problem he had years before. They lacked formal combat training. Elfman fought solely with brute strength and quick reflexes. He never devised a plan of attack, simply throwing punches and hoping for the best. Naruto frowned as solutions began to whisper in his mind. The Goken could work for him. He lacks the flexibility to master the Juken or other shinobi taijutsu styles, and his strength would make him truly effective against his opponents. I'll also need to increase his speed. He can't rely solely on strength. Meditation and mental exercises are essential if he wants to master the total transformation. He managed to cross the guild before stopping and lowering his head. Great, idiot. You volunteer to take someone to the infirmary without having a clue where it is. He quickly created a clone and sent it to Makarov to get the information. Naruto continued to ponder this as he stroked Urza's red hair. He had squatted down, with Urza's legs on the ground and her head resting in the crook of his left arm. Lisanna is currently the weakest link of the three. As a support mage, she'd be the first to fall. I'll have to observe her in action to determine her true strength, but it would be best to teach her everything I can about healing. I doubt she can replicate medical jutsu, but she'll need to be able to assist them with more than just first aid. Now, how do I make her a medical expert? The answer came to him soon, and Naruto was surprised by what his mind offered him. I'll need to compare chakra and magic further to be sure, but I believe that would be the best way to make her strong quickly. Once the foundation is established, I'll be able to increase her speed and strength phenomenally within 6 months. A fleeting thought made him smile. Natsu will have to be careful with Lisanna when he's done with her. In his arms, Urza stirred slightly as she regained consciousness. She tried to open her eyes, but the effort was immense, and she soon had to give up. Still somewhat dazed, she preferred to snuggle closer to the warmth of his embrace. The innate strength of the hand supporting her back told her she was being carried by a man, and the scent she inhaled was faint, like nature itself. Curiosity surged through her, and Urza lifted her heavy eyelids to see a large, blurry figure. She blinked several times to focus her vision and found herself staring into Naruto's eyes, paralyzed. The strange sensation that coursed through her head was the feeling of Naruto's fingers gently stroking her hair. "Are you awake yet, Urza?" he asked as he squatted down and headed toward the infirmary, grateful for the wonders of the shadow clone technique. He was amused by how quickly the girl's face went from pale to a furious red, the same shade as her hair, in less than 2 seconds. "Don't worry, I'll explain when we get to the infirmary." She nodded without saying a word, not daring to speak, and let herself be led by the blonde man. Fairy Tale Guild Hall. Kana watched as Naruto left with Urza behind him, silently amused by the situation. He hasn't even been here a week, and he's already making a name for himself in the industry. However, as she thought about her rapid achievements, she frowned as her thoughts began to whisper. If he keeps going at this rate, he'll become an S-class mage before me. If that happens, my own chances of reaching S-class will be drastically reduced. Her heart sank when she thought about it. With monsters like Laxus and Naruto on stage. A snort from her close companion pulled Kana from her thoughts. Mira Jane stood with her arms crossed, watching Naruto's figure disappear with narrowed eyes. "Lucky idiot," she muttered, though Kana could understand what she'd said. A mischievous smile spread across Kana's face as she put an arm around the sullen mage, startling Mira Jane. She lasciviously observed Mira's annoyed and nervous expression. "So, Mira, why all the interest in Naruto-san? I thought Laxus was your little toy." Mira Jane wrung Kana's grip, but didn't storm out. "First of all, Laxus is just a friend. I don't understand why you all think we're a couple." She wrinkled her nose in disgust. Sure, Laxus had his good points, but he was too clingy for Mira's liking and always tried to get things done that included her. Naruto-kun is a nice guy I'd like to spend time with. Besides, he's the first rookie to beat Red and me, which I don't think anyone expected. And on top of that, he's incredibly hot. Have you guys even touched that body? Mira Jane moistened her lips. Kana felt a bead of sweat trickle down her face at the girl's temperament. She'd never met anyone as eccentric as Mira Jane. She could be calm and quiet 1 minute, a raging demon the next, and so foul-mouthed that Kana thought she'd been born shouting obscenities. Well, only you would think of groping someone just minutes after meeting her. Mira nodded, dismissing the odd comment. "You should try it sometime. Maybe you'll find someone who suits you. By the way, do you know where Laxus is right now? I haven't seen that bastard in 2 weeks, and he owes me money from a bet." Mirane. Both girls turned and saw Lisanna standing a little behind them, hands on her hips, a serious expression on her face. Next to her were Natsu and Gray. The latter looked bored, and the former was feeding the happy fish. "Aren't you supposed to be getting ready for the surprise? We only have a few hours to prepare, you know." Kana, Gray, and Natsu looked surprised and intrigued, while Mira Jane rubbed her head in dismay. "Damn it, thanks for reminding me, Lisanna. Could you tell Naruto-kun I have to go? He wanted to talk to Elfman, so let him know when he'll be discharged. Goodbye." With that, she stormed out of the guild, ignoring those she pushed and shoved. Infirmary Fairy Tale. Naruto sat on a nearby stool, watching Urza recover. He had just recounted the events of the battle and was waiting for the redhead to process everything he had told her. After a short while, Urza sighed. "So I lost. I shouldn't have underestimated your strength." Naruto stood up and approached Urza, who was lying on one of the infirmary cots. "To be honest, you deserve your reputation. I've heard about re-equip magic and how difficult it is to re-equip different items. Not only can you re-equip entire armor sets, but the speed at which you do it makes it a lethal and versatile technique in combat. He paused to catch his breath and continued. However, you do have some obvious weaknesses. First, you leave yourself exposed every time you prepare to re-equip, as well as right after doing so. Not many people are fast enough to exploit that, but it's still a weakness. Second, you focus too much on swordsmanship, which makes you vulnerable to experienced melee fighters. I think you're aware of that, aren't you? Urza grimaced at the memory of that beating. Yes. What do you suggest I do? It seemed odd to her that she was asking someone who had just joined the guild how to improve, when the normal thing would have been for her to practice with training dummies or train with Mira Jane to correct her mistakes. Naruto touched his chin. Do you mind if I sit next to you? She moved aside silently, giving him room to sit. Naruto sank back onto the comfortable bed and resumed his thoughts. What I suggest is that you ask the guild's best melee mage to teach you a few things and practice from time to time. You can continue using swords, but incorporate what you learn into your fighting style so your skills are well-rounded. Urza blinked several times, mentally reviewing her advice. How do you know so much about fighting when you're only? Her voice trailed off as she realized she had no idea how old Naruto was. Excuse my indiscretion, but how old are you exactly? Naruto didn't even flinch at her curiosity. I'm 13 years old, about the same age as Mira-chan, if I had to guess. My godfather raised me to be the best in combat, whether it was hand-to-hand, mid-range, long-range, or with magic. He was very demanding and always pushed me to my limits, making sure I understood everything I needed to know about fighting. Lying like that is a hassle. I'll have to contact Jiraiya and prepare an alibi for when I get back. Urza nodded, accepting his story. So you defeated Mira and me because you were stronger and more experienced than us? Yes and no. While my skills surpassed yours in terms of control and power, your lack of teamwork was what truly caused your downfall. Urza was startled. The idea of working together hadn't even crossed her mind. All she wanted was to fight him and see how he fared. Teamwork. Naruto nodded. Why do you think I kept switching targets between you and Mira-chan every time you got close? I wanted to keep you separated so it would be easier to defeat you both. If you had focused on fighting me as a team, with you keeping me busy with ranged attacks and Mira-chan closing in to finish me off, the outcome of our fight would have been different. Urza pouted adorably. Mira Jane would rather eat manure than work with me. Naruto raised an eyebrow. If you don't mind me asking, why are you and Mira-chan so competitive? Sure, you're rivals, so it's normal to take jabs at each other, but you're always on the attack, and it's pretty intense to watch. In any case, their rivalry seemed like a watered-down version of Madara and Hashirama's in terms of destruction, and a diluted version of his own with Sasuke in terms of intensity. Urza shrugged slightly and looked away. It's something we've been doing since we met. There's no particular reason. Mira Jane constantly challenges me, and I always accept. For some reason, opening up to Naruto came very easily to her. He had an aura that inspired trust. I see, Naruto said, standing up and turning to Urza with a smile in his eyes. I'm sorry to leave you alone, but I have some things to take care of. I hope to see you soon, Benaheim-chan. He walked to the door and opened it, but didn't leave yet. Hiding your heart behind that armor isn't the best solution, he stated, still not looking at her. Acknowledging the darkness within is necessary for personal growth. Suppressing it is harmful to you and your family. He turned to her, gazing at her gently, his face reflecting surprise. You may have deceived others, but you can't deceive someone who has worn a mask their entire life. You want to be strong so you never suffer again, neither physically nor emotionally. That armor gives you strength, but you're only showing your crutch. Accept your flaws, and your heart will begin to heal. He gave her another smile with his eyes. As a fellow guild member and friend, I offer you my help and support for your personal growth. Have a good day. He bowed his head and left. Urza sat there, staring at the space Naruto had occupied, a whirlwind of emotions paralyzing her. She replayed his words in her head once more, recalling the sincere look in his eyes. She felt her cheeks warm as she remembered the new nickname he had given her. Venaheim-chan, friend. Time skip, 6 hours later. Hey, Elfman, where the hell have you been? Macau shouted when the Strauss family arrived with Elfman from the wizard's hospital. Elfman didn't look any different, except for the bandages covering his chest. Elfman let out a shaky laugh as he rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry, but I wasn't feeling well. Mirane and Lisanna just picked me up from the hospital. Macau dismissed his apology with a gesture. I'm glad to hear you're okay. Naruto was waiting for you. He said something about training. Elfman stopped and scanned the room, looking for the blonde boy. He soon found Naruto sitting in the middle with Kana, deep in conversation. Turning to Macau and Lisanna, he waved to them before leaving. Mira Jane had left to run an errand a while ago, after they celebrated with a special lunch, so she wouldn't be back for a while. Lisanna had just left to find Natsu and happy to play with them. Naruto looked up from his drink and saw Elfman approaching slowly. He sighed and stood up to greet him, saying goodbye to Kana. He walked over to his new friend and bowed his head slightly. How are you? Feeling better? Yes. Elfman's throat went dry as the seconds ticked by, and he suppressed the urge to swallow. So, he began, staring intently at Naruto. You said you wanted to talk to me. A nod was her response. I want to help you solve your problem. Right now, anyone who accepts a request from you risks fighting for their life if that beast takes control of your body. Elfman felt the words pierce him and grimaced. He knew what Naruto meant. If he hadn't been there at that moment, Mira Jane would have been seriously injured. Knowing that fueled his guilt and his resolve. He wouldn't hurt his family. I accept. Naruto blinked. You didn't hear me. It's not necessary. Without you, Mirane would be in the hospital right now, and I'd be nothing more than a prisoner in my own body. Elfman shuddered at the memory of the beast's immense willpower. It was like a raging tidal wave that swept away everything in its path, shattering his mental defenses as if they didn't exist. He was scared. If Naruto could help him stop the beast from taking over, he would do whatever it took. He had to protect his family. I don't care if it's difficult. I don't care if I'm in danger. Please, he said, bending his knees in supplication. Help me become strong. Naruto raised an eyebrow. They had a lot of work to do. Time jump, 6 months. Naruto entered the guild with Setsuna by his side, his arm around her once more. Half a year had passed since Naruto had offered Elfman the chance to master his magic, and Naruto couldn't have been prouder of his friend. His progress was average, but that didn't bother Naruto. Everyone developed at their own pace because they were unique. Elfman was one of those who learned by repeating increasingly difficult exercises. He wasn't a genius, but he was intelligent and knew how to make the most of what he learned and what was available to him. However, if Naruto was to be honest with himself, Elfman's weaknesses were still obvious. Having grown up with a rowdy group in Fairy Tail, he was impatient, prone to making mistakes, and rarely accepted help. No matter how much Naruto emphasized the importance of teamwork, Elfman remained stubborn and refused to cooperate. Oh well, what can you do? I didn't know Naruto was more stubborn than him. It would be a lesson for him when Naruto resorted to more drastic measures. In short, besides training Elfman, Naruto and Setsuna were making a name for themselves, albeit the former reluctantly. Several clients who had hired Naruto praised his fighting skills and the fact that he didn't destroy anything, unlike the other fairy tale mages. Women also knew him for his magic hands. Several requests from massage therapists came to Fairy Tail specifically asking for the blonde man after their first client, a wealthy woman with considerable political influence, mentioned him at one of her social gatherings. From that day on, the older men admired him as if he were their god. Setsuna was also praised for her strength and crowned the Queen of Lightning, due to her mastery over her primary element, which surpassed even the Kage's control. Unlike Naruto, she was very selective about the jobs she accepted and treated her clients with cold politeness, earning her the nickname the Demon King's Crow. Her friendship with Kana had also strengthened during that time. She was unable to connect with Gray and Natsu, whom she considered too annoying to be anything more than guildmates. Of course, there was also the fact that she could easily defeat them with one arm. Her relationship with Urza had evolved into a friendship, providing the redhead with a training partner who would help her progress much faster than before. Mira Jane, on the other hand, had declared Setsuna her eternal rival after witnessing Urza's defeat at Setsuna's hands during one of their matches. Setsuna thought it was cute that Mira Jane believed herself strong enough to call herself Setsuna's rival. "Good morning, Naruto. You look gorgeous, as always," Kana grumbled. The brunette had grown a little more, and puberty was starting to make itself known, attracting more and more male attention. At that moment, she was slumped over the table, her hair disheveled and dark circles under her eyes betraying her mood. "Seriously, how do you always manage to look so fresh? Even your hair looks better than mine on my best days." After parting ways with Setsuna, who pouted shyly at the loss of contact, Naruto sat down with a bored expression. "To be honest, I don't know how I managed to keep my hair so well-groomed. I guess it's just naturally great." A flicker of amusement crossed his eyes when Kana shot him a glare, as if blaming him for its current state. "Besides, I get up early to go for a run around Magnolia to get some exercise. You should try it sometime." Kana shrank even further. "Do I seem to have your incredible stamina? I don't even have the energy to get out of bed in the mornings, let alone go for a run," she groaned. Setsuna also sat down, finally joining the conversation. "Are you going to look into a job application later today?" "Naruto, fight me," roared a voice. Naruto sighed in exasperation as Natsu's flaming fists approached his face at normal speed. "I should have learned my lesson by now." Tilting his head indifferently to dodge Natsu's punch, he extended his right arm and grabbed the falling boy by the hair. With a not-so-smooth flick of his wrist, Naruto hurled poor Natsu against the second-floor wall. The sound of flesh hitting stone gave him a certain satisfaction. Kana raised her head and looked at her. "No, the truth is I'm not in the mood for requests today. Besides," her face twisted into a strange grimace, "Guildarts is coming today." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Guildarts, the ace of fairy tale, huh? It must be time for the S-class tests." He rarely slipped into Makarov's office, but he was glad he'd taken the opportunity. The S-class mage promotion trial was something that interested him. At the time, he had ample funding thanks to Everlu's fortune, and letting his name grow in Fiori would be beneficial. Not only would it deter other guilds from challenging Fairy Tail, but it would also draw Naraku to pursue him. Furthermore, he would have the chance to fight the mysterious Guildarts Clive and finally discover what made him so special. "Listen up, you undesirable brats." All activity ceased as Makarov's voice rose above the din. The short, elderly man stood on the second-floor stair railing, radiating an aura of seriousness and enthusiasm. "I'm sure most of you already know what this announcement is about. For the newcomers, the time has come for an event that marks the advancement of the truly exceptional, the S-class exams." A thunderous shout of jubilation echoed through the hall, and the enthusiasm and excitement were reflected on every member's face. As you know, the S-Class Mage Promotion Trials are an annual tradition in which we participate to give any mage the opportunity to become an elite S-Class Mage. This year, we have 3 trials and a battle royale. Each of these trials will test your leadership, intelligence, and combat prowess. These trials will assess your level in relation to these qualities, while the Battle Royale offers mages with lower scores the opportunity to shine and dazzle the judges with their skills. Natsu let out a shout of jubilation, prompting another round of applause. "The trials begin at the end of the month. Those interested should come to my office to register." Seeing the younger ones rushing toward his office, Makarov shouted again, "Ah, I remember now. Anyone under 13 is not allowed to participate. And this goes especially for you, Natsu." "That. How come Naruto and the girls are having so much fun? Real men need to shine too." "Silence." Makarov's head grew to demonic proportions as he loomed over the terrified boys, surrounded by a fearsome aura. When I say something, you'd better listen. Understood? Why, yes. Kana sighed deeply as the noise continued. Why was life so damn troublesome? Naruto crossed his arms. The time was almost here. Soon he would demonstrate his true power. Did the council want a demonstration of his strength? He would show it to them. He would show everyone how dangerous he could be. Isla Tenru. A sleeping figure stirred, frowning. Uzumaki. Naruto. It murmured sleepily as a dark aura began to emanate from its slumbering body. Friend. Oria. Naruto dodged Elfman's direct punch, launching himself backward to the ground. His student's enormous, black, hairy arms slid across the empty space it had previously occupied with far greater speed than Elfman usually displayed, a clear indication of his progress under Naruto's tutelage. Not bad, he said. Slamming his hands on the ground, Naruto stopped his fall and delivered a brutal reverse spinning kick to Elfman's chin. Elfman lost his momentum, becoming disoriented and suspended in midair, one of the worst possible positions when facing someone of Naruto's caliber. But it's not enough. A second kick landed in Elfman's stomach, sending him flying about 10 feet, spitting out saliva. With a crash, the disciple plummeted into the vegetation surrounding the training field, leaving skid marks that tore his clothes. Gritting his teeth, Elfman focused and managed to get to his feet with a half-jump and half-back somersault. Thanks to the beast leg, Black Bull spell. I'm not finished yet, Naruto-sensei, he roared. Naruto jumped to his feet, bracing for the next wave. Show me then. Come on, let's see the fruits of your training. Without wasting a second, Elfman clasped his hands together, forming the monkey seal, and focused. The seal aided his meditation and helped him gather magical energy for his spells, but it was generally unnecessary. While it helped him concentrate better, that didn't mean he couldn't do it without it. The deception gave him an advantage in fights, and he refused to reveal his full abilities to his enemies. Ultimate Takeover Technique. Partial Beast God. A massive magic circle erupted before him, emanating a yellowish energy in waves that, had Makarov been present, would have left the guild master speechless. Anyone sensitive to the levels of energy released would have been dumbfounded when comparing them to Elfman's previous magical abilities. It wasn't just a little bigger. It was as if he were a completely different person. His newfound magical power had far surpassed even his own expectations. At that moment, his abilities rivaled those of his older sister in her transfiguration form, something very few in the guild could boast. Regrearark. Elfman's scream grew deeper and more bestial as his body underwent various transformations. His torso expanded rapidly, becoming more voluminous as the transformation progressed. His legs thickened progressively, taking on the appearance of a feline. Judging by the large paws that formed in place of his feet, they resembled those of a large cat. His spiky hair grew thicker and stood on end, forming a mane around his head. His skin lightened considerably, and reddish fur began to cover his torso. In half a minute, the transformation was complete. Elfman regained his original height, though a few centimeters taller than before, and his new form was revealed. His body structure was that of the beast Elfman had created in his disastrous first commission, but with some notable differences. For starters, his feet were the same as those in his Tiger Man form. That is, they retained their feline appearance. His body was almost entirely covered in scales, a distinctive feature of his recent and successful Lizard Man transformation, while his arms were made of stone. His eyes gleamed through the clouds of dust. In short, his figure was imposing. Naruto sighed, his hair waving in the wind. He still needs to improve the speed of his transformation. 16 seconds might be acceptable in Earthland, but there's always the possibility of encountering someone really fast. Not bad, Elfman. If only I were a turtle, he exclaimed haughtily, testing Elfman's anger. A low growl echoed from the transformed mage, prompting a mocking smile from Naruto. Now that you're done, let's see your hand-to-hand combat skills. He relaxed his stance and rummaged in his weapon's pouch, feeling a growing nostalgia as his fingers brushed the pages of a book. He paused briefly before taking it out, revealing that it was the latest edition of his bingo book collection. He had started compiling it about 6 months before leaving the Elemental Nations. With so many memories of different shinobi in his head, he often forgot various jutsu. To avoid this, he collected bingo books to better understand the shinobi featured and to review the jutsu he couldn't recall. Elfman, running toward his sensei, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Naruto engrossed in a book, his mouth agape. Without a second thought, he leaped toward him and readied his left arm to deliver an elbow strike. If before he would have tried to make Naruto take him seriously again, now he had learned to exploit any advantage his opponents gave him. It wasn't the most honorable thing to do, but a man has to do what he has to do to win, according to Naruto. Of course, it would be unrealistic for Elfman to assume that Naruto was finished. After the first 3 months, Elfman realized that Naruto was never taken by surprise in combat. On all the occasions he had trained with the blonde, he had only managed to land a single attack when Naruto had already caught him off guard. That allowed Elfman still struggled to understand how Naruto maintained his composure and always managed to block, stop, or counter each of his movements. As expected, Naruto's right hand, the one not holding the book, caught the limb that was approaching with the speed of a cobra. Due to Elfman's new, bulkier physique, he could only throw his left leg at Naruto, hoping to at least graze him. No luck. This time, Naruto raised his right leg and blocked the feline paw, which was larger than Elfman's. With his hand still gripping Elfman's elbow, he attacked. Lightning element armor. A blue beam coursed through his body, imbuing him with unusual strength and power. The beam erupted from his fingertips and pierced Elfman, electrocuting him with a shock so powerful it caused him to convulse violently. A light tap on the chest ended young Strauss's pain, though it sent him flying to the other end of the training area. As Naruto turned the page of his book, he mentally reviewed Elfman's improvements. He's at least twice as fast as before, which will greatly benefit his agility if he continues to practice. A roar reached his ears, and he continually dodged Elfman's barrage of punches. As expected, having focused primarily on the force of his blows, his brute strength has increased and is rapidly approaching the superhuman level. He ducked under a clawed hand and, with indifference, punched Elfman in the face. His pain tolerance is his most distinctive trait. He can withstand damage at the level of a seasoned chunin, possibly even a jonin if he so chooses. Overall, he's progressing well as a hand-to-hand combatant. However, as if a switch had been flipped, Elfman reverted to his original form in a shower of light, signaling the end of his spell. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath to relieve his exhaustion. Phew, that was much better than the first few times, he murmured, sitting up. Naruto nodded as he turned the pages again. Yes, your new spell is much smoother than the first few times you tried it. Are you feeling any effect? Elfman shook his head. No, I feel fine. I don't have any pain like last time. Inside, Elfman was ecstatic with the progress of his new spell. As its name suggested, it was a fusion of all the monsters he had used his magic on, a perfect blend of human intelligence, animal grace, and demonic strength. I'm glad to hear that, Naruto said, slamming the book shut, crossing his arms, and frowning at his student. However, there are some weaknesses we need to address. For starters, the spell only lasts for 10 minutes, which we need to improve. Since it's a spell that affects the body, it would be best to increase your stamina and understanding of it so you can fight longer battles, as well as reduce the amount of magic energy you consume while in that form. Elfman pulled a notebook from his clothing, which had miraculously remained undisturbed throughout the entire test, and began to jot down the points Naruto had raised. Yes, please, continue. Secondly, the beasts you chose for the spell contradict each other. For example, the beast focuses on brute strength, while your Tiger Man is designed for speed. Your form, while ideally viable, is not effective in combat against agile opponents. Luckily for you, I have a solution which I will reveal to you tomorrow. The groan he heard made him chuckle softly. Come on, the S-class tests start tomorrow. You'll be super busy when they begin. Real men seize every opportunity that comes their way. Era. Someone seems very lively today. Next item on the agenda, a review of your dodging skills. She smiled with her eyes. Grandma, I've never been so happy to discover your sadistic side. Elfman and Lysana will surely benefit from this, though I'm sure they'll condemn me to hell for it. Anyway, that day, Elfman acquired a healthy respect for all kinds of sports balls. The damage they could cause in the hands of a skilled fighter was not to be taken lightly. Time skip, Uzumaki residence. Setsuna hummed a tuneless song as she stirred the pot. Tonight, she would cook dinner for both of them, something she had reluctantly agreed to in front of Naruto. Instead of handling all the housework herself, as she had longed to do ever since becoming his servant, Naruto had drawn up a schedule that divided the chores between them, with rotating shifts. They had discussed it for a while, and Naruto had convinced her that being his servant didn't mean he would delegate all his responsibilities to her. Finally, Setsuna accepted the proposal and adjusted quite well to her new routine. Turning the fire down to a low setting, she perked up when she heard the doors open. Anticipation filled her, and a light blush rose to her cheeks. Would she like the surprise? Kurami had insisted she would shower her with compliments if she did, but she was so nervous. It was so unusual for her that for a moment she considered abandoning her plan, but her desire, for once, propelled her forward. I'm here. She slapped her cheeks, regaining her composure. Welcome home. The moment of truth had arrived. Kasen had taught her how to get his attention, and she was going to do it. In her own little world, Kurami settled into one of the chairs in the room and grabbed some popcorn to prepare for the show. Beside her was a dildo she'd crafted in the likeness of her future partner's member, just in case things got intense and he got aroused. You can do it, Setsuna-chan. Show those mages that you're the alpha. Naruto calmly entered the kitchen, about to ask what Setsuna was cooking for dinner, but he stopped and stared at the Uchiha. Or rather, at her clothes. A simple apron that did nothing to conceal her figure. On the contrary, it seemed to accentuate it, and to top it all off, it was nighttime, when men are usually more sexually active than during the day. What message are you trying to send? He asked, slowly approaching his friend. She nearly turned bright red when Kurami started giving her more lines to say. Naruto-sama, please grant this Uchiha's wish. Leaning against the table, she lifted her left leg and rested it on the surface, making it quite clear what she wanted him to do. She arched her back, accentuating her bust, which pressed taut against the apron and looked ready to burst. Please, take my virginity one more time. She finished with that damned seductive look she'd learned from her bijou, a look that very few could resist. Stopping right in front of her, Naruto wondered why she was being so bold that day. She wasn't menstruating. Otherwise, he would have smelled the blood, and she was immune to possession, one of the many advantages of having Kurami sealed inside her. Setsuna. He began tracing figures on her thighs, exciting her with his clawed fingers. Is something bothering you? You know you can always tell me what's bothering you. Her breath caught in her throat as he dangerously grazed her thigh with his fingers. She stammered as he knelt and removed his mask. His mouth opened and brushed against her smooth skin, making her flinch in surprise. Oh, Kami-sama. She swallowed and shuddered again when his mouth kissed her body, and the coldness of his muscles sent a tingling sensation through her entire body. I love Naruto-sama. She gasped as she held herself up with her arms, feeling the heat concentrate in her chest. She breathed in a broken voice as his hands joined her caresses, caressing her firm, sensual body. After a lot of lemon. In the end, they didn't have dinner. Did they mind? Not at all. The next day, fairy tale? Mira-Jane raised an eyebrow at the sight of her new rival. Setsuna seemed to radiate a light of her own and exuded a satisfaction that piqued her curiosity. After observing her for a few more minutes, she shook her head and turned back to the master, who was on the second floor observing the members. All right, brats. The candidates selected for the S-class exams will now be announced. To those who didn't make it, I encourage you to use this as motivation to improve yourselves next year. Coughing to get their attention, Makarov pulled a scroll from his sleeve and opened it. The contestants are next. Urza Scarlet. The audience erupted in applause as the armored mage stepped forward, determination blazing in her eyes. She marched to the second floor, where she met Makarov. When her eyes met Mirajane's, she wore a smug expression. Mirajane Strauss. As quickly as it had appeared, the smug smile vanished, replaced by one of irritation, as Mirajane calmly made her way to the second floor. Reaching the stairs, she turned to face Setsuna. "See you upstairs, Setsuna," she said with a smile before approaching her companion. Laxus Dreyer. Many fell silent, shocked. Was Laxus there? The crowd turned, searching for the prodigal son, when a disembodied voice was heard. "What's going on? It seems they weren't expecting me to get promoted." A bolt of lightning shot through the guild, landing on the second floor with such speed that it caught Setsuna's attention. As the lightning dissipated, Laxus appeared. He was a very tall, muscular teenager with blue-gray eyes. His hair was slicked back, with numerous spiky strands falling over his forehead. He had a distinctive lightning-shaped scar over his right eye, and like his grandfather, he sported dark lines around his eyes, each with a prominent eyelash protruding from it. He wore an orange robe with leopard-like spots on the shoulders and sides, with dark-rimmed sleeves that reached below his elbows and fur trim at the bottom edges. He wore a bright red cape, tied in the front with a striking knot, which bore a large, lighter fairy tale symbol on the back, and dark, baggy, wide pants tucked into light metal greaves. Around his waist, he wore a simple belt to which he attached the device connected to his magic headphones. She also wore a small chain attached to her right wrist. Naruto watched him put an arm around Mirajane with a smug smile and narrowed his eyes. Mirajane was clearly annoyed, but Laxus didn't notice. Setsuna Uchiha. More cheers echoed as the Uchiha heiress ascended the stairs, her regal bearing making her movements seem even more graceful than ever. Kana Alberona. Kana swallowed hard and stood up from her seat with difficulty. As she passed Naruto, he gave her a thumbs up, which cheered her up a little. And the last candidate, Naruto Uzumaki. A second later, Naruto was on the second floor, appearing in a gust of wind between Laxus and Mirajane. Naruto pulled Mirajane away from Laxus's embrace and narrowed his eyes at the sight of Makarov's grandson. Based on what he'd done earlier, it was safe to assume he'd used lightning magic, though Naruto decided to remain vigilant for any other kind of magic Laxus might have up his sleeve. "Hey Mira, is he bothering you?" he asked, wrapping her in a protective hug with his back to her. He had seen the way Laxus looked at Mirajane. He looked at her as if she belonged to him, as if they were destined to be together. At that moment, Naruto wanted to see what Laxus was capable of, and what better way to do that than by provoking him into attacking. Mirajane was about to push Naruto away when an idea crossed her mind. She collapsed into his arms, giving Laxus, who was watching her in surprise, a satisfied look. "Yes, but don't worry." Naruto-kun, the emphasis and the intimate way he pronounced her name put everyone present on alert. Laxus was dangerously obsessed with Mirajane, something most didn't understand. Was he a masochist? Laxus frowned at their interaction. Who did that cocky rookie think he was? Who the hell are you, and what are you doing with him, girl? Naruto was irritated by this, something the girls noticed immediately. If you didn't hear Master announce my name, I don't even want to imagine what you'll look like when you're senile. And for the record, he began to emanate from the shorter blonde boy in the form of a dark aura, and he lunged at Laxus with the force of an enraged bull. Mira-chan isn't property. She doesn't belong to anyone. A crackle of lightning began to crackle around Laxus's right arm. "Damn it," he growled. "That's enough, you two," Makarov reprimanded. "Save your provocations for the first test, the combat skills test." Era. The Magical Council was the governing body of the wizarding world. It wielded almost absolute control over it, acting as a kind of supreme government. The council ruled all the legal guilds scattered throughout the lands, overseeing and keeping them in check, and was also responsible for incidents caused by wizards. It had the right to punish wizards who broke the law and to confiscate magical artifacts that could cause widespread damage. The Magic Council is composed of 10 members at a time, or, to be more precise, 9 seats, from the 2nd to the 10th. The first seat was occupied by the president, effectively the leader of the entire council, who made the final decisions on all matters. At that moment, all the members had gathered with a single purpose: to evaluate Fairy Tail's rising star, Uzumaki Naruto. The report they had received from Makarov had caused them great astonishment. A boy no more than 13 years old possessed magic capable of taming wild beasts and turning them into docile creatures, even legendary dragons. A heated debate had erupted over the boy. Should they expel him from the guild and recruit him into the royal army, or should they leave him in Makarov's care? After 3 days of incessant discussions, the president finally made his decision. They would wait for the boy to mature within the Fairy Tail Guild before taking any further action. If they deemed him mature enough, they would then proceed to incorporate him into their group. At that moment, the members of the Magic Council were gathered around a large circular table with chairs for them to sit on. A huge video lacrima levitated in the center of the table, offering everyone a perfect view. Thanks to the lacrima, and with Makarov's permission, the council members could witness the first 2 tests from their headquarters. The first member, starting from the right clockwise, was a tall old man with a large gray beard and mustache. He had pointed ears and the habit of opening only one eye. He wore several layers of robes, as did the other members of the Magic Council. Above his head, a small, bat-like creature could be seen. His name was Org, the Sage of the Magic Council. So, the S-Class tests have finally begun. Now we'll see that boy Makarov kept going on about, he said in a gruff voice. Indeed, it will be interesting to see his skill. The speaker, seated next to Org, was a short, elderly man with brown hair and a mustache. His tufts of hair resembled ears, and what appeared to be a pale yellow tail gave him a feline appearance. Like everyone else, he wore several layers of robes. His name was Michello. Another member snorted. I doubt that teenagers' display matters. For all we know, his magic might be the weakest of all the fairies. His voice was noticeably more youthful than the others, like someone in the throes of puberty. He was young, about 16, and his most striking features were his blue hair and a strange reddish mark/tattoo below and above his right eye. He wore a smart but simple robe, a long white tunic with black stripes along the edges and upper arms, a decorated collar, wide straps attached to ornate buckles that fastened it in the front over a dark shirt, and matching trousers and shoes. He also sported a ring on the middle finger of his right hand, a stylish way of telling people to fuck off, and a medallion that identified him as a member of the 10 wizard saints around his neck, hidden by the collar of his jacket. His name was Seagrain. A girl let out a nervous giggle, twirling a large crystal teardrop in her hands. Era, Seagrain-sama, it's not right to underestimate someone, especially someone praised by the guild master. She was even younger than Seagrain, probably around 14. She had pale skin, dark purple hair, and brown eyes. She wore a simple but revealing white dress with a striped pattern. Her name was Altair Milkovich. The person sitting next to him was a tall old woman. She wore a cloak like the other members of the council and a purple turtleneck sweater. Her most distinctive feature was her long nose, which gave her a witch-like appearance. She had sandy blonde hair, tied back in a large ponytail. It was Belno. I agree with Seagrain. Aside from that lost magic of his, why expect anything extraordinary from the teenager? The next member of the council was a short, elderly man with thick, flesh-colored eyebrows and a thin mustache that reached halfway down his mouth. He wore a long-sleeved brown shirt with black vertical stripes and a black tricorn hat. Come on, Belno. Makarov may be older, but his principles are admirable. The last of those gathered was a tall, middle-aged man who wore small, round, dark glasses. He wore a white and blue Magic Council cloak, always with the hood up. He had full, thin lips, tan skin, black hair, and long sideburns that almost reached his lips. He sported a stubble of beard. His small, pointed eyebrows gave him a perpetually serious and angry expression. The first trial is about to begin, Yajima. It will be quite a spectacle. I've heard that Makarov's grandson will be taking the exam. Altair let out an exaggerated sigh, her hands still toying with her lacrima. I wonder what he'll be like. Makarov-san didn't give us any description of Uzumaki-san. A mischievous smile lit up her face. Perhaps he'll be charming. Ord raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't it be obvious? They start with the test of strength. Each pair of contenders will fight at a set time, and their names will be announced. Unless he caves into the pressure and withdraws, I don't see how we could miss him. Fairy Tale Exam Grounds. All right, everyone, Makarov announced, drawing the attention of all the participants. They were in a protected tent, away from the stands where the other Fairy Tale members were cheering and placing bets. We'll start in 5 minutes. In this test, your objective is to defeat your opponent and demonstrate your combat prowess. His gaze shifted to Laxus as he spoke. No serious injuries or life-threatening attacks are allowed. Broken bones are permitted, but attacks that seriously affect the health and career of the participants are strictly prohibited. Naruto frowned. His plan to end Laxus's career by breaking his spine had vanished. Gaara could do it to people he disliked when he was a genin, so why couldn't he? I guess that's the price to pay for joining a legal guild. A cough from Makarov snapped him out of his reverie. The first to face off will be Urza Scarlet and Setsuna Uchiha. The two girls glanced at each other, Urza with enthusiasm and competitive determination, while Setsuna analyzed her with an expressionless face. When the bell rings, the participants must come up on stage. Good luck to all. With that, Makarov left them in silence. Laxus smiled smugly and crossed his arms. This will be a piece of cake. I'll annihilate them all with my power, right, Mira? He turned, expecting to see her approach, but growled when he saw that damned kid from before talking to her, and that weak brunette. Hey, you bastard. Stop acting like her buddy. Mira Jane blinked in surprise when Naruto stopped talking and glared at Laxus. With his mask obscuring the lower part of his face, she couldn't see his full expression, but she sensed he was annoyed. Are you a jealous kid, or just plain slow? If Mira-chan wants to talk to me, who are you to tell me to stay away from her? Laxus turned red with anger, clenching his fist in rage as Mira Jane glared at him in disappointment. What had happened while he was away training the Thunder God tribe? Sure, there had been some tension between them after their last fight, but he thought things would have gone back to normal. Was it because of that new boy? Did he seduce Mira, stealing her away from her boyfriend? The more she thought about it, the more plausible her theory seemed, and she glared at Naruto. I swear I'll get rid of you someday, Uzumaki. Look, you belong to me. Not to you. To me. Exam location. On the stage, which was a vast expanse of land serving as a battlefield, Setsuna looked at her armored friend with a smile. Didn't you draw an unlucky opponent, Urza-san? Urza said nothing, but her eyes twitched slightly. She had barely won any of her matches, and the times she had were due to a combination of luck, surprise tactics, and Setsuna's lack of enthusiasm. Sure, she had improved, but her progress wasn't drastic enough to defeat her friend. Perhaps we should start the match and see what happens. Yes, perhaps we should. The match supervisor, who ironically was Brother Strauss, decided not to waste any time. The match between Setsuna Uchiha and Urza Scarlet begins. Barely having exchanged words, the two girls launched themselves at each other with a speed that astonished those unfamiliar with their training. Being the faster of the two, Setsuna managed to draw her sword long before Urza and began the fight with a feinted thrust. Urza was not fooled and chose to attack Setsuna with her magic broadsword, putting great force into her blow. Metallic sound. Setsuna's cold eyes met Urza's fiery ones as her Kurohime clashed with Urza's sword. Neither yielded an inch in their quest for dominance. In a shower of sparks, Setsuna swung her sword diagonally, deflecting the heavier one. Unlike their previous encounters, Urza didn't overexert herself. She had learned her lesson after the beating Naruto had given her. Releasing her sword just as Setsuna tossed it aside, Urza threw a punch with her armored fist at Setsuna. Setsuna swiftly deflected Urza's fist with her left hand, though she had to reinforce it with chakra to avoid bruising. Undeterred, Urza turned her fall into a somersault. Gripping the ground, she spun 360 degrees and launched 2 roundhouse kicks at Setsuna. Instead of impacting flesh, Urza's feet met no resistance. Crouching, guided by her battle instincts, she summoned a shield from her dimension to block Setsuna's aerial attack. Urza winced at the impact and leaped away from Setsuna, who landed easily despite Urza blocking her attack. Setsuna raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Urza's reaction. Well, you hardly ever use shields. Seems my lessons haven't been forgotten." Without a word, Urza equipped 2 more magic swords, wielding them with the hilt reversed. "How did you dodge my previous attack?" she asked, buying time. The spell she was about to cast was relatively new, as she hadn't practiced it much, and she needed to take advantage of any opportunity. Setsuna stroked Urza's cheeks with her free hand, with a hint of amusement. Era, and I thought you'd outgrown that habit. I suppose I'll have to re-educate you in combat etiquette." The tone of her voice, which promised immeasurable suffering, along with the smile that accentuated her angelic features, made Urza pale and take a step back. That mistake nearly cost her the fight. As Urza stepped back, Setsuna was right in front of her with Kuroheim already descending in a vertical slash. She barely managed to block the slash with her right sword, only to be pushed back by Setsuna. Taken by surprise, Urza blocked Setsuna's upward kick with her second weapon. Looking into Setsuna's eyes, Urza immediately closed her left eye and focused her right on Setsuna's Sharingan. "That's better," she whispered. With an explosive movement, Setsuna broke free from Urza's grip, spun around, and delivered a blinding kick to Urza's chest plate, sending her reeling backward. "It's still not enough," she shouted. Urza felt the air being knocked out of her lungs by the force of Setsuna's kicks and switched from her broadswords to a katana. She plunged it into the ground and unleashed her spell, Crimson Sakura Demon Blade. The blade began to glow with a malevolent red, its edge sharpening as Urza channeled more magical energy into it. Hearing Kuroheim's hiss once more, Urza dodged the barrage of slashes. Re-equip flight armor. Her outfit vanished almost instantly, revealing her new armor. Naruto, who was watching the fight through the video lacrima in the shop, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Last time, he had trained with her and Mira Jane. The speed of her requip ability had been impressive, but he had needed to stop before the spell took effect. Now she was able to do it against someone as fast as Setsuna. It was truly admirable to see the progress she had made in just 6 months. Jumping back, she launched herself at Setsuna with incredible speed, becoming a blur even to Laxus. With Setsuna on the defensive as Urza attacked with all her might, the raven-haired mage unleashed blow after blow. However, thanks to her Kekiai Jinkai, Setsuna anticipated her attacks with ease and parried or blocked every single one of Urza's strikes. Setsuna, thrusting her left leg back, smiled as she executed her latest favorite jutsu, Chidori Koken, Thousand Birds Sword. As Urza swung the sword again, lightning enveloped Kuroheim's blade. Upon impact, Urza's katana transformed into a long spear in a shower of sparks and a metallic clang. Setsuna watched Urza with a satisfied smile, impressed by how quickly she had equipped herself. The armor was primarily gold and light blue. The breastplate was decorated with gold ornaments and had thin plates that extended around Urza's neck. She wore a headband with 2 ribbons, and her hair was styled in a long braid. As previously mentioned, her weapon was a long spear with a very large blade and a decorated circle resembling a shield, attached to the shaft and adorned with a large ribbon. Waiting shop. Inside the shop, Laxa snorted. Is she really using the Lightning Empress armor against that weak Lightning Mage? What on earth is she thinking? She's hardly a threat. He crossed his arms, staring intently at the video lacrima, oblivious to Myra's frown as she watched him belittle his opponent. Naruto shook his head at Laxus's words. Setsuna is one of the best, if not the best, the guild's Lightning Mage right now. That wasn't entirely true. As far as he knew, she was the most knowledgeable about lightning manipulation in the guild. However, it was also true because she didn't use lightning jutsu frequently. Urza's decision was the necessary action to gain more points in this race to become S-class. It demonstrates that she's capable of making decisions that effectively resolve any problem that comes her way. Furthermore, with her rapid re-equip, she shows versatility in her fighting style, something that most mages seem to lack. Laxus growled furiously at being humiliated once again by Naruto in front of Mirajane. Shut up, you fucking know-it-all. Elite S-class mages are selected for their power, not for the decisions they make. In the end, those without power are destined to be forgotten, never to become S-class mages. Before Naruto could reply, Mirajane voiced her opinion. Could you two just stop fighting already? This fight is getting interesting. Damn it, she scolded, punching Laxus's arm and grabbing Naruto with her fist. Pulling Naruto toward her, she moved away from Laxus. Since you two can't behave civilly around each other, I'll have to separate you, she declared. Laxus frowned as he watched Mirajane slide Naruto's arm close to her ample chest. A pang of jealousy twisted his heart. If the newcomer hadn't been there, he would have been the one in Mirajane's arms. It infuriated him to see his best friend and object of desire being snatched away by that blonde bastard. That bastard. When the time comes, I'll make sure he takes his hands off my wife. Battlefields. Urza was having a hard time. It wasn't that her Lightning Empress armor wasn't working, because it was. After fighting Setsuna countless times, Urza knew she could use lightning magic and had specifically saved up for the armor. However, it was the way Setsuna used that lightning that was truly causing her suffering. Unlike Laxus, who preferred to unleash lightning at mid-range and incorporate it into his melee combat, Setsuna channeled a constant stream of highly concentrated lightning through her sword. This not only electrocuted Urza every time they clashed, but with each strike, Urza felt her Lightning Empress armor crack and shatter from the surge of voltage. After all, while the Lightning Empress's armor have the offensive power of a lightning attack and granted Urza a limited ability to use lightning magic, Setsuna's incredibly high affinity for lightning far surpassed the armor's limitations. Powered by her monstrous chakra reserves, even with its power halved, her lightning sword was superior to Urza's armor. Hearing Setsuna's footsteps approach, Urza whirled around and dodged her thrust. A knee strike landed against her chest plate again, and a sharp crack was heard as Urza gasped in pain. Releasing her re-equip, Urza wandered around dazed. Setsuna watched Urza stagger, her arms clutching her chest, and decided to end the fight. Urza had already proven herself enough for the master to take her seriously. There was no need to continue this charade. She vanished among a flock of crows and reappeared before Urza, a discreet hand seal ready to cast the Jinjutsu. Only her instinctive reflexes saved her from losing her head. Throwing her head back to dodge Urza's diagonal slash, Setsuna fell backward as she launched another upward kick. Urza blocked the attack with her gauntlets and immediately jumped back. Adopting a crouching stance, she weighed her options. She could continue fighting, surrender, or try to force Setsuna to surrender. She snorted at the first option. Setsuna was merely toying with her and knew almost all of her tactics. Facing an opponent with so much information about her strengths and weaknesses was practically suicide, had that been the real situation. The second option was more appealing than she cared to admit. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have even considered it. She would have fought on to the bitter end. For one thing, surrendering would leave a bad taste in her mouth and wound her pride as a mage. For another, Makarov hadn't told them what the next task was. From what she knew, it might require her to conserve some magical energy to overcome it. Spending all her magic on this fight would demonstrate her inability to plan for possible future skirmishes. In other words, it would give the impression of someone focused on the present, rather than saving energy for potential future battles. Besides, her pride wasn't everything to her. So what if she didn't achieve S rank on her first try? Everything happens for a reason. So if she didn't succeed, she could always try again next time. The third option was impossible. Getting Mira Jane to behave like a refined lady would be infinitely easier than trying to deceive Setsuna. The last time she tried, she ended up buried in the dirt for almost the entire afternoon. Urza sighed and raised her hand. I give up. If I continue, this fight will only end in my defeat, and I don't see the point. It bothered her a little that Elfman was looking at her with incredulous eyes, but she managed to suppress her anger, leaving only a slight trace in her nervous tick. After composing himself, Elfman proceeded to shout, "Winner by default, Setsuna Uchiha." Waiting shop. Mira Jane blinked in astonishment at the announcement. She surrendered? Red actually surrendered in her fight. She nearly lost her temper. Urza, the most stubborn person in the entire fairy tale guild after her, had swallowed her pride and acknowledged Setsuna as her superior? Naruto, who was standing next to her, and Kana, shrugged. It was the only thing she could do. Setsuna knows how to fight. She's physically superior, and she doesn't give up easily. The fight ended the moment it began. Urza gave it her all, but sometimes luck isn't on your side. Something Urza just experienced. Kana frowned, tearing her gaze away from the Lacrima video and fixing it on Naruto. But why give up? How does that prove someone is capable of being in S-class? She could sense it, but she needed to stay out of the spotlight right now. Naruto was the main focus. He'd proven himself an expert in combat, and according to her sushi-obsessed friend, he was strong enough to defeat Setsuna. Laxus had shown interest in defeating him. Mira Jane was interested in the possibility of facing him again, and even she wanted to see how she measured up against him. This proved very useful to her, against no one except Naruto, because he was one of those who never underestimated anyone. Expecting her to be competition, she had the element of surprise on her side. Well, unless they paired her with Naruto. Naruto pulled a book from his belongings and began to flip through it listlessly. I can't fault Urza for bravely facing Setsuna. However, very few have the courage to sheath their sword once it's drawn. He stopped at a marked page and began to read. Fear isn't a bad thing. It reveals your weakness. And once you know it, you can become stronger and better adapt to the challenges that come your way. It's necessary to become an S-class mage. Learn this lesson well, and you'll undoubtedly go far in life. The sound of the tent flap opening drew the attention of all the remaining candidates to Makarov and another individual entering. Naruto squinted as he assessed the stranger, a tall, muscular man with shoulder-length reddish-orange hair slicked back and some stubble around his mouth and on his chin. He was simply dressed, a dark, threadbare cloak with a high collar and shoulder pads, held in place by a belt and covering his entire body, and loose-fitting dark trousers with an armored belt featuring plates similar to those on his shoulders, tucked into simple boots. The man's magical abilities intrigued Naruto, though he felt they were suppressed to a minimum. He could sense they far surpassed anything S-class aspirants could achieve. If he compared his former self to the unknown one at his peak, it would be a close battle, but Naruto was confident he'd found a way to defeat him, though he doubted it would be anything different from the usual, overwhelming his enemies with his shadow clone jutsu, activating the Nine-Tails chakra mode, and finishing them off with a new version of the Rasengan. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. Damn, I was really lucky if I managed to survive that. His sensitive ears caught Kana's gasp of surprise as she glanced at the man. Pretending to read his book, he observed the emotions reflected on her face: surprise, joy, sadness, embarrassment, and a hint of hatred. A rather interesting mix of contrasting emotions, especially the last. He felt curious about the possible relationship between the man and Kana, but shrugged and returned to his book. If she was ready to tell him, she would. There was no point in pressing her for details. All right, everyone gather around. It's time to choose the next pair of contestants, Makarov said in front of the giant screen. I remind you that losing or forfeiting the match doesn't mean you're out of the competition for Class S. If you fall to your opponent, use it as a learning experience to improve. Looking at his partner, Makarov coughed slightly. The next match, chosen at random, is Kana Alberona versus Mira Jane Strauss. The apologetic look he gave her irritated the dark-haired card magician. Mira Jane looked at Kana with a searching gaze. Are you ready for this, sister? Laxus interrupted before Kana could say a word. What are you saying? Her card magic against your total control? What other outcome do you expect besides easily defeating her? Kana gritted her teeth in anger and disappointment as she heard Laxus, one of her most powerful mages, humiliate her in front of Gildarts. She was furious that her magic had been insulted and degraded to something not even worth learning. She had dedicated years to practicing her card magic, investing so much time, effort, and energy in mastering it. To be belittled, especially by the master, enraged her like nothing else. Before she could open her mouth, likely to retort and end up saying something she didn't mean, Naruto spoke. Do your best, Kana. I'm pretty sure you have a few surprises in store for us. He winked discreetly as she turned and looked him in the eye. She felt a lump in her throat. Pushing those thoughts away, she nodded resolutely and headed for the stands, her mind racing with plans and counterplans. On her right arm, a seal briefly appeared before vanishing as quickly as it had come. Exam location. Elfman swallowed audibly as he watched his sister and Kana leave the store. It was obvious they would be the next to clash. Nachan, you'd better not underestimate Kana. You have no idea how much she's changed. She closed her eyes and sighed deeply. This next battle could turn ugly. Her sister was never one to be caught off guard. Are both fighters ready? Kana nodded resolutely as Mira Jane smiled mockingly. Begin. Kana immediately began launching rows of magic cards at Mira Jane with swift and precise movements. Mira Jane easily dodged the barrage of cards, though she made a point of avoiding them after hearing them slam into the ground with enough force to shatter it. Kana kept her face expressionless as she continued to hurl more cards at her opponent. Mira Jane burst into laughter as she dodged, flipped, and evaded all of Kana's cards. Hey, Kana. Enough of this nonsense. Your act is boring. Dodging another barrage of cards, Mira Jane decided to go on the offensive. Extending her hand toward Kana, her magic flowed beneath her as she uttered her spell. Stream of darkness. A multitude of large tendrils sprouted from the ground and lunged at Kana. Dodging them, Kana cursed as another group of tendrils emerged from the earth and tried to engulf her. Wind's edge. She drew 2 cards. She combined them in one hand and, with the other, waved it in the direction of the spell, activating it. A gust of wind rose from the ground several meters away, forcing Mira Jane to leap into the air to dodge it. Upon seeing this, Kana let a mocking smile spread across her face. I caught you. Channeling magical energy into his left hand, he swiftly struck his right bicep, simultaneously releasing the accumulated power. In a puff of smoke, 2 black gloves appeared on his hand. He managed to put one on while Mira Jane was still airborne, leaped toward her, and readied his right gloved fist. Mira Jane saw the fist coming towards her and grimaced as she prepared to block it. Shit! What happened next was truly astonishing. When the impact occurred, Mira Jane was launched far beyond the distance at which she should have landed. Instead of being knocked down with only a slight increase in speed, she was propelled away from her original position with a velocity comparable to jets. The crowd remained silent for a few moments, no doubt trying to understand what had happened, before erupting in cheers during the show. Kana landed gracefully, put on her other glove, and surveyed the clouds of dust that had risen when Mira Jane crashed to the ground. She could barely make out a shape. Squinting, she saw something that looked very much like a bat's wing. Demonic explosion. A massive sphere of dark energy dispelled the dust cloud, revealing Mira Jane in her partial control form. She pointed the sphere at Kana and fired, unleashing a powerful violet beam at her. Thinking quickly, Kana slammed her fists into the ground. The force of the blow kicked up a layer of earth, which she swiftly improvised, shielding it with her magical energy, until it became a makeshift barrier. When Myra's attack reached her, a huge, dense cloud of dust rose up, providing Kana with a good smokescreen. Just a few feet from the dust cloud, Mira Jane's form was fully revealed to the crowd. Unlike her Satan soul, she didn't age when using this spell. It could be said that she resembled a miniature version of her Satan soul. Her hair was still styled in its usual wild fashion. Her attire was the same gothic clothing she always wore. Her arms were covered in scales, though they lacked the fin-like protrusions on the outer edges, as well as the gauntlets. Large wings completed her form, wings reminiscent of a bat's, with small, pointed protrusions along their upper edges. The Fountain of Prayer. A jet of water erupted from the cloud of dust, hurtling toward Mira Jane with relentless speed. Discharge of Destiny. A flash of lightning followed the water, its static form appearing and disappearing as it surged forward. Taking flight once more, Mira Jane smiled maliciously as Kana emerged from her hiding place and prepared for another attack. Propelling herself forward with her wings, Mira spun around and unleashed a spinning kick that collided with Kana's right hook. Using the momentum to power up the blow, Mira Jane slammed Kana into the arena with her right fist and finished her off with another demonic blast attack. The lightning bolt struck Kana, slamming her hard into the unforgiving earth, forming a small crater. When the dust settled, Kana's bruised and battered body twitched on the ground. The crowd gasped as Mira Jane landed in front of the fallen girl, a sorrowful expression on her face. Kana was her friend, one of the few true friends she had in the guild. She wasn't a very good fighter, and her magic was more supportive than combat-oriented, while Mira Jane seemed born for battle. The moment the master called their names, they both knew how it was all going to end. The fact that Kana gave it her all and kept getting up only made him sadder. Mira Jane ducked, preparing to knock out Kana and claim victory when she felt it. A pulse of magical energy right beneath her. Eyes wide, she tried to jump back, but a magic circle suddenly appeared. Summoned lightning. Kana shouted, completely throwing her off. It wasn't coming from the Kana she was about to knock out, but from behind her. A cage of green lightning rapidly expanded from the seal and engulfed Mira Jane completely, electrocuting her with a massive amount of energy. Mira Jane's cries of pain deeply moved Elfman, but he forced himself not to give in to his desire to end the fight just yet. There was still a chance that Mira Jane could turn the tide. The battered Kana turned to smoke just as the lightning cage was shattered by a powerful blast of dark magic. Landing with difficulty, Mira Jane began searching for her dazed opponent. That last attack left me completely thrown off. I need to end this quickly. Clutching her knees to keep from falling, Mira then noticed a shadow that was getting bigger and bigger. Heavenly kick of pain. Disoriented, Mira made the rookie mistake of looking toward the source of the shout. A sandaled foot slammed into her face, burying her in the ground and creating a small crater, raising another cloud of dust in the sand. Unlike before, Kana hadn't used her magic to execute the attack. She still struggled to control the flow of energy like Naruto and Lisana, and trying to do so in the heat of battle would only backfire. Silence reigned in the arena as Kana panted after the grueling fight. Standing tall and proud, though exhausted, she raised her fist in victory. Knockout victory, Kana Alberona. Urza. At the Magic Council, every single member had been watching the matches with interest to assess the strength of Fairy Tail's new generation. While some, like Seagrain and Belno, were annoyed by the constant delay of Naruto's debut, most were impressed by the matches they had witnessed so far. While the battles didn't compare to those of S-class mages, it was remarkable that such young mages could fight as well as the new generation of Fairy Tail. Ord continued stroking his beard as he watched the fights. Such an impressive and efficient requip skill. This Urza Scarlet seems to have pushed requip magic to its limits. When word gets out about her ability, she might even become a role model for future requip mages. Michello nodded, his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Her swordsmanship is surprisingly high for a teenager. If I had to give an honest assessment, I'd say she's practically on par with our captains. He opened his eyes and frowned as he watched Urza and Setsuna face off. The other girl, Setsuna Uchiha, also shows great promise. Not only is she very skilled with a sword, but she's also capable of using it in conjunction with lightning magic to inflict considerable damage on her opponents. Seagrain chuckled, her gaze fixed on her old childhood friend. Indeed, she has talent. Surpassing the Lightning Empress's armor is something only a select few can do, and even they resort to other forms of magic. To accomplish such a feat, one must possess an exceptionally strong affinity for lightning. Yajima nodded. Yes, I've never seen anyone think of channeling lightning magic through a blade. Most of the time, the weapon used is a spear to avoid accidentally striking the wielder due to its length. However, I understand why a blade could also be used. The lightning will not only enhance the blade's sharpness to the maximum, but if an opponent is stabbed, their body will be paralyzed. A very unorthodox solution, but very effective. Belno snorted. That may be so, but I think the match between Kana Alberona and Mira Jane Strauss was disappointing. Strauss barely paid attention to her surroundings, focusing solely on defeating her opponent and showing little to no strategy to prove she has the makings of an S-class fighter. Altair covered her lips as she chuckled. Well, what did you expect from fairy tale wizards? They rarely think and are prone to fits of rage brought on by their emotions. If anything, we should be impressed with Miss Alberona's performance. It's very rare to see fairy tale wizards fight strategically. Yajima was startled to hear the following announcement. Final match of the first trial. Naruto Uzumaki versus Laxus Dreyer. Starts. As the council members focused their attention on the video Lacrima, Seagrain smiled smugly as she leaned back. Urza's performance had been good, but it would require a great sacrifice to bring back the Black Mage Zeref. Even if she continued to progress at this rate, it wouldn't be enough. Even so, something good has come out of all this. Setsuna Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki. I wonder if any of you will be the one to free Master Zeref from his slumber. Fairy Tale Exam Grounds. In the center of the arena, the two potential S-class warriors stood face to face. At the far south end, Laxus smirked as he removed his cloak and magical headphones. He tossed them aside without taking his eyes off his opponent and began stretching and warming up. To the spectators, he appeared indifferent to the impending fight. So you're ready to eat dust, kid? Naruto, standing before Laxus, ignored the provocation and began to remove his black coat down to his ankles. Pulling on one side, the three X-shaped marks that held it together came undone easily and quickly. As the coat fell away, the crimson vest beneath was revealed, the tattoo-like bands across his chest and wrists, and the black lines on his forearms were more prominently displayed. The coat vanished in a flash of light, and Naruto stared at Laxus with narrowed, bored eyes. The question you should be asking me is how far I'm going to go. If I were you, I'd start losing hope right now. Laxus frowned deeply and assumed his fighting stance. I'll make you eat your words, he growled. Naruto shrugged and reached into his pocket for a book, causing Laxus to look at him in puzzlement and Elfman to put his hand to his face. I'm ready when you are. Determined to start the fight, Elfman lowered his hands. Naruto Uzumaki versus Laxus Dreyer. Begin. Turning the page, Naruto decided to begin the fight slowly to test the waters with Laxus. He had a general idea of what Laxus was capable of. Now he needed to learn the details and the limits of Makarov's grandson. Shouldn't you be attacking already, honorable grandson? Laxus stiffened at the sound of the name and unleashed a massive burst of magical energy in the form of lightning bolts. The lightning enveloped him like armor, bathing him in a brilliant yellow light. If Naruto hadn't known him, he would have thought Laxus was trying to look like an angel or some celestial being. "Don't come back. Call me that," he ordered, his voice heavy with negativity. Naruto paid him no attention, simply turning the pages once more. Era, do you think you're in a position to give me orders? Honorable grandson." He smiled with his eyes, making Laxus turn red with anger. "Fuck you." Manipulating the electrical energy of his body, Laxus vanished into pure elemental lightning that crackled with fury. The lightning hurtled toward Naruto at the speed of sound, easily appearing behind the blonde and rematerializing into Laxus, whose lightning-wrapped fist descended toward Naruto's back. A weak backhand sent him flying away from Naruto, crashing to the ground undignified. Laxus managed to recover just in time and land safely, wincing as he felt the left side of his face throb. Rubbing it, he squinted, looking at Naruto. How? How is it possible that his eyes are tracking my speed? I should have been able to hit him without him noticing. Determined to try again, Laxus used his lightning body spell to move away at high speed and attempt to attack Naruto from the right side. With his right hand occupied, it would be easier to attack from there. Unfortunately for Laxus, Naruto had a long history of facing shinobi as fast as himself. By the time Laxus had covered half the distance, Naruto was already on the move. With his right leg raised, he blocked the knee strike Laxus threw at his body, and with his left, he deflected the punch aimed at his stomach. Laxus immediately retreated and tried again from another angle, growing increasingly frustrated. A frustration that intensified as Naruto blocked, dodged, and countered every blow. What truly irritated Laxus was that Naruto not only kept pace with his lightning strike, but he hadn't even taken a single step the entire time. It was as if he could predict his every move. An elbow struck Laxus's face with brutal force, momentarily disabling his lightning body spell. Regaining his composure, Laxus once again attempted to catch Naruto with his speed. Appearing directly above the blonde reader, he launched a downward diagonal kick toward Naruto's head. That's when Naruto moved. Like Laxus, the blonde, had never seen before, disappeared from his sight, at a speed imperceptible to his eyes. His attack failed completely. Laxus didn't even have time to regain his balance before Naruto reappeared and elbowed him in the exact same spot as before. Back on the ground, Laxus growled furiously as Naruto continued reading his book. This can't be happening. I can't let that rookie play with me. It's just a dream. That's it. I'm going to wake up, and I will win. Then Laxus noticed something that froze him to the spot. Where Naruto had been, there was, exactly in the exact same spot where he'd been before disappearing and dodging Laxus's kick. There were no footprints, nothing to indicate he'd moved. Laxus didn't know it, but at that moment he began to see Naruto as a role model. His speed, even among lightning mages, was superhuman. He was showered with praise for being one of the fastest in Fiori, if not the fastest faster. Naruto's speed wasn't superhuman. It would be an insult to compare it to that of a human. It wasn't even divine, because that would imply that, however impressive it was, it didn't reach a level incomprehensible to mortals. That assumption would also be wrong. Naruto's speed was that of the gods themselves, a speed that transcended the limits of inferior, semi-evolved beings. Controlling his trembling, Laxus decided to try something new. Placing his right arm a few inches from his left, with both palms open and extended, he created a sphere of lightning around his forearm. Thunder bullets. A barrage of small but destructive bolts hurtled toward Naruto at great speed. Seeing the beams hurtling toward him, Naruto decided his book had to vanish to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Stuffing it into his pocket, where it remained sealed, Naruto lunged at Laxus, dodging the barrage of orbs like a snake slithering across a river's current, as if moving in slow motion. Appearing silently before Laxus, Naruto launched him upward with a powerful kick reminiscent of Mighty Guy's Asa Kajiku, Morning Peacock, Taijutsu. Without pausing, he used the Kage Bio, Shadow Dancing Leaf, technique to appear behind Laxus, perfectly mimicking his movements. Using the creation of all things jutsu, he created black bandages and skillfully immobilized Laxus, similar to how Lee used his bandages to perform the Omote Range frontal lotus. With Laxus immobilized, Naruto activated a gravity seal and slammed him to the ground. Still suspended in midair, Naruto took a deep breath as he manipulated his powerful chakra to flow like Natsu's and attacked. "Fire Dragon!" he exclaimed. Hearing the silence from the crowd, Naruto smiled maliciously, seeing the confusion they must be feeling. Roar! A huge column of flames descended on Laxus, causing a tremendous explosion that destroyed a large part of the venue and forced Elfman to jump into the stands. Landing in a crouch, Naruto peered through the smoke and saw Laxus struggling to his feet, with several burns visible on his body. Revenge is sweet, isn't it? Still, I'd better get this over with quickly. Approaching the staggering Laxus at full speed, Naruto concentrated chakra in his hands and he punched him. Several times, in rapid succession, point blank. Asa Kajaku, Morning Peacock. Face, arms, legs, chest, abdomen, back to the face, switch to the chest. Naruto left no spot untouched in his furious assault, striking with equal force and speed. The crowd could only see countless flames spreading like a peacock's feathers as Naruto relentlessly pummeled Laxus until he was unconscious. After knocking Laxus down, Naruto waited half a minute, calmly reading his book once more, before the crowd and Elfman's astonishment subsided. Winner by knockout, Naruto Uzumaki. The outcome of the announcement was as predictable as rain on a cloudy day. The crowd of mages roared with jubilation and approval, shouting and waving their hands fervently as they recalled the recent battle they had witnessed. Bottles of beer were opened and drunk with an enthusiasm that would have seemed extravagant to anyone outside the guild. Thunderous applause echoed through the stands as the proud friends of the combatants exchanged words of praise and pride. In a section of the stands where the younger generations were seated, Natsu let out a thunderous shout of jubilation at Naruto's victory, even standing up on his seat and yelling his excitement. "Woo! Yes, that fight was incredible. Naruto beat Laxus like a sack of potatoes." "Yes," Happy agreed, while Lisana pampered his small cat body. Gray, sitting 2 seats away from Natsu and right next to Lisana, smiled broadly as he nodded. Yes, he humiliated Laxus so thoroughly that even the old man must feel sorry for him. With his hands behind his head, Gray leaned back slightly to observe Laxus's lifeless body with satisfaction. "I can't deny I'm enjoying this. I think that bully got what he deserved. Someone finally knocked him off the pedestal he's so proud of." Lisana frowned uncertainly at Gray's words, inadvertently playing with Happy's wings. "Even so, I think Naruto was a little harsh on him. That last attack really seemed awesome, right? I bet he could teach me some of his moves. Then I'll be even more awesome than I am now," Natsu exclaimed, giving Gray a smug look, which caused the ice mage to frown deeply. Gray stood up, ignoring Wakaba's unintentional slap, and shot his rival a disdainful look. "As if Naruto would waste his time teaching you any of his moves. You'd only end up burning down the guild again, just like when he tried to teach you the fire release, water release technique." Natsu immediately stood in front of Gray, pushing through Lisana with surprising strength, growled at his rival, and breathed fire. "At least he had the decency to try and teach me his attacks instead of wasting his time with a slushy stripper like you." Gray frowned at Natsu's words and began pressing his head against his. "That just goes to show what you know. He's already taught me a bunch of things that, according to him, were above your level. Wanna see? Dare to try, Snowflake? I'll burn you to ashes." "Not in your dreams." Lisana sighed in exasperation as the two began another mock fight beside her. A giant cloud of dust obscured their figures, and only the sounds of their struggle could be heard. Honestly, sometimes the boys were so stupid. Waiting shop. Inside the shop, Makarov and Gildarts watched the projection of the teardrop, which showed the final moments of Naruto's fight, specifically, the last attack he had launched against Laxus. Having both fought against numerous high-level hand-to-hand combatants, they recognized the immense skill required to execute the devastating technique they had just witnessed. Gildarts frowned as the scene repeated itself. I don't know what to make of this, Master. However much of a genius the boy is, he shouldn't be able to unleash such a powerful attack at his age. His body should be in the throes of puberty, meaning it's developing, adapting to its future form, and granting him greater strength. For him to possess such power at this age, he shrugged resignedly. I don't understand it. Makarov said nothing, simply crossing his arms as he watched the projection showing Naruto's furious attack, so fast that some blows looked like mere flashes on the screen. Another thing that worries me, Gildarts continued, is the nature of that attack. If you analyze it closely, the first blow seems to be the most damaging, leaving the victim paralyzed with intense pain. The subsequent blows are only slightly less powerful than the first, implying that the attack as a whole was designed to be a one-hit kill technique, ending the life of its target at the end of the flurry. While Laxus is clearly not dead, I don't think Naruto should be considered an S-class mage for some time. No member of Fairy Tail, no matter how recent their joining, should use such a damaging technique against another. Makarov sighed deeply. I understand your point of view, Gildarts. Believe me, a part of me wants to do what you say and remind Naruto that Fairy Tail is his family. Family always sticks together, no matter what, and what he did definitely crossed the line. After another deep breath, Makarov continued. However, as guild master and as a person, I can't stop Naruto from reaching S-class status. As much as I might ignore it, Laxus's words ring true. Without you and me, Fairy Tail would be nothing to boast about. Before Naruto and Setsuna came along, Laxus would have been considered the strongest after you, and we both know the enormous power gap between you two. Turning to Gildarts's astonished face, Makarov spoke again. As much as we try to deny it, Fairy Tail needs more powerful mages are needed to thrive. Without more powerful mages, there would be fewer applications. With fewer applications, there would be less to offer those interested in joining the guild. If this continues, the guild's future is bleak. Coming out of his shock, Gildarts growled at Makarov. Are you going to let a future fugitive become an S-class mage for something that might not even happen? Come on, man. You need to realize that continuing down this path could backfire and tarnish Fairy Tail's name even more than you think. Unfortunately, Gildarts, that's my decision. I will instill in Naruto the importance of loyalty and family. Remember that. But I won't deny him the opportunity to achieve more in life. This discussion is over. With that, the short, elderly man walked toward the candidates, leaving Gildarts deep in thought. Second tent. Inside the second tent that had been erected during the previous battles, the S-class candidates rested, all with expressions of anticipation, sullenness, and, in Laxus's case, disgust, as they awaited Master Makarov's arrival to inform them of the next test. Urza and Mira Jane were huddled together in a corner. Urza spoke in a low but heated voice, while Mira Jane argued with equal vehemence, her arms crossed in defiance. To everyone in the tent, it was obvious that Urza was questioning her rival and lifelong friend about her disappointing match against Kana. Naruto easily understood that Urza was trying to come to terms with the fact that Mira Jane, whom she couldn't easily defeat and with whom she often drew, had been beaten by Kana. Rather easily, at that. Deep down, despite knowing that she had improved immensely under Setsuna's tutelage, she now doubted her abilities. Naruto sighed. Teenage girls were a real enigma, with the constant, contradictory messages they sent. Naruto crossed his arms and felt the brush of his hand against the pocket of his coat, where a scroll was hidden. Letting his gaze scan his surroundings once more, he silently scolded himself for being so eager to read what Jiraiya had sent him. The S-class exam is neither the time nor the place to read what Ero Sensei has discovered. The Magic Council will be watching, and this exam will be my only chance to make a good impression on them. Setsuna, always at her side, swayed from one foot to the other as she watched Laxus Dreyer with moderate interest and barely concealed disdain. She had heard what he had said about his apprentice and found it rather distasteful how he belittled Urza's battle tactics. The arrogance he displayed reminded her of the unpleasant antics of Senju Nawaki, her former Chunin squad commander, as well as those of the Senju clan as a whole. With a Jinjutsu over his eyes, no one except Naruto noticed that he activated his clan's famous Kekkei Genkai and made eye contact with him. Inside the seal, Kurami chuckled as he watched his pup's actions. That fool won't even know what happened to him. Good move, Setsuna. It's almost as if they never even considered tipping the scales in their favor. Setsuna nodded mentally. Yes, although Naruto-sama still has the greatest advantage over all of US, though I wonder if he managed to mark Dreyer-san with his Hiratian seal. Either way, that still puts Naruto-sama at the top of the order. And you're in second place, right? He shrugged. Who else could pose a challenge to Naruto-sama? The tent flaps flew open and Makarov entered, his expression serious. All right, guys, the next test will begin shortly, so get ready. I see the wounded have recovered thanks to Poryusuke's help. I'm sure you're wondering why, he said, gesturing to Mirajane, Urza, and Laxus, who all looked healthy. Seeing their agreement, Makarov continued. The truth is that these tests will increase in difficulty as we approach the end of the exams. Therefore, all participants recover after each test to prevent any decrease in performance due to injuries sustained in previous tests, as well as to detect and disqualify those participants who use certain stimulants to enhance their performance. Has there been any case where doping has been a problem? Urza asked, frowning at the thought of someone cheating on the exam. Makarov nodded earnestly. Yes, there have been some cases where mages, overwhelmed by the desire to achieve S-class status, subjected themselves to all sorts of rituals, drank all sorts of potions, and did anything to pass the exam. Laxus snorted at that. What losers! If they hadn't been such cowards, they wouldn't have had to resort to such despicable measures. For my part, I'm quite insulted that you think we'd do something like that, old man. He shot his grandfather a furious look. Naruto and Setsuna rolled their eyes. Why did people here consider cheating dishonest? When facing opposition from multiple people, it was always better to have an advantage to compensate for being outnumbered. Makarov frowned. Insulted or not, you'd better take this warning seriously in this exam. Now prepare for the next test, the knowledge test. Era. Back at the Magic Council, many of its members were talking aloud about the young mage that fairy tale guildmaster Makarov had boasted about so arrogantly, Naruto Uzumaki. After witnessing his battle against Laxus Dreyer, a powerful lightning mage, many were euphoric and impressed with the outcome. Yajima let out a booming laugh as the fight ended. Huh, there you have it. Here they all were, looking down on the young man as if they were all-knowing or something. And they were absolutely right. Maki may be old, but he's not senile yet. Ord grimaced at Yajima's words. To be fair, most of the recommendations and reports we receive about individuals tend to be, at least to some extent, exaggerated. Makarov's claim that the kid was capable of creating an entirely new class just seemed like the typical arrogant boast that most guild masters make about their most prized members. Coughing lightly to clear his throat, Org looked at his colleagues with interest. So, what did you think? Belno was the first to respond. I find him as powerful as Makarov said. Not only did he demonstrate incredible strength, great combat skill, and particularly devastating fire magic, but he also exhibited a speed perhaps never seen before. If you watch the fight more closely, she pointed to the screen as the recording played. You'll notice that Uzumaki completely dodged Dreyer's charge, returned to his previous position, and struck him in the face with his elbow, all in tenths of a second. Altair leaned back in her seat, her gaze fixed on the screen that replayed the fight with unusual intensity. That implies his leg muscles are abnormally strong to allow him to reach and maintain such speeds. His clothing reveals he doesn't have a robust build. In fact, his physique resembles that of a sprinter or a swimmer. Appearances can be deceiving. Delicately taking a lock of hair and absent-mindedly twisting it around her finger, Altair's expression relaxed and took on a mischievous tone. Getting kicked by those mechanical legs must hurt like hell. Altair-san, that language is not appropriate for someone as young as you. Belno reprimanded her, with a slight frown on his face. Altair nodded with a mischievous smile that betrayed how much she had thought about what had been said. Beside her, Seagrain rubbed his head, embarrassed, and laughed nervously. I think I jumped the gun this time, Yajima-san. This Uzumaki seems to be really talented. Seagrain, settling into a more comfortable position, continued to give his impression of Naruto. He seems very resourceful and used his opponent's anger against him. Something I'd say, from experience, is very useful. The only other magic he used in the fight was fire magic, but what I just witnessed is far more impressive than anything I've seen from our top fire mages. Resting his chin on his palm, Seagrain gave Org a mocking smile. If anything, it resembles the kind of control the fairy tale dragon slayer has over his element. Coincidence, perhaps. The festive atmosphere in the room turned somber as everyone watched the final blow once more, comparing its execution to that of Natsu Dragneel, the youngest fairy tale member to inflict the most damage in over a decade. As the council members grew increasingly alarmed by the unsettling similarity between the two attacks, no one except Altair noticed the maniacal grin that spread across Seagrain's face. After all, if he could appear to be someone the boy could trust and depend on, why would he use force when persuasive words would be more effective in convincing him to help him resurrect Zeref? Estadio Fairy Tale. Back in the stadium, the S-Class candidates presented themselves to Makarov as he explained the second test. The test of knowledge will test your ability to discern your opponent's magic alignment, as well as your skill in dealing with unknown magic. To increase the difficulty of this test, you will have 2 minutes to name at least 2 different types of magic that your opponents will use against you. Urza stepped forward once more, a question burning on her lips. Who will we face? The old man chuckled and withdrew his hand from behind his back, revealing a small, slightly crumpled paper bag. I'm afraid you'll have to figure it out for yourselves. Although I know the names of all the individuals you'll be facing, not even I can predict who you'll choose. Extending the bag, Makarov gave it a gentle shake with a smile. Go on, pick your target and pray you get a good one. With a hint of displeasure, Laxus moved forward, but still gave the others a confident smile as he reached into the bag and began to rummage through it. After a few moments of thought, he withdrew his arm to reveal a small strip of paper carefully folded in half. Unfolding it, he frowned, confused. Is some guy named Jiraiya going to test me? Makarov nodded indifferently and extended the bag toward Kana, who was closer to Laxus. Those you will face are individuals I have carefully chosen to test your mettle. As master, I have a right to know what magic they use in order to understand the difficulty this challenge will present. As she approached Makarov, Kana reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper at random. Unrolling it, she raised an eyebrow at the name written on it. My opponent's name is Anko Mitarashi. What kind of name is that? Next it was Urza's turn. Tenzo, she said, narrowing her eyes thoughtfully. Mira Jane cracked her knuckles and reached into the bag, her expression intense. Withdrawing it, she read the name with a hint of excitement. Jugo. Setsuna was next, her expression calm and serene as she chose her opponent. Chojuro. Sounds interesting. Naruto watched as Kana, Mira Jane, Urza, and Setsuna each drew a name from the bag and announced their opponents, suppressing the smile that threatened to light up his face even though his late mentor's mask always concealed the lower half of his body. He had tested his patience by ensuring his pseudopaths caught Makarov's attention and were selected for this trial. Seeing that it was finally his turn, he reached into the bag with a hint of interest. With his hand hidden, A thread of chakra emerged from his finger and connected to a piece of paper that still held residual chakra. With a swift flick of his index finger, the paper appeared in his palm, and he withdrew his hand. As he unrolled the paper, a look of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. Minma Kazama. Fairy Tale Exam Grounds. Very well. The test of knowledge is about to begin. Elfman roared, having to shout to be heard over the roar of the crowd. The first candidate to participate is none other than Laxus Dreyer. His opponent will be Jiraiya. The audience applauded enthusiastically, but that did little to lessen the pang of anger Laxus felt at how subdued the applause was compared to when they had cheered Uzumaki. Frowning, Laxus stormed out of the tent and walked to the center of the stage, watching intently the person standing next to Elfman. The first thing he noticed was Jiraiya's height. The man stood a little over 1.80 meters tall, barely a few centimeters taller than Laxus, who was already quite tall even for an adult. His gaze fell upon his clothing and narrowed. Jiraiya wore a short green kimono and matching trousers, beneath which he wore chainmail armor peeking out from his sleeves and legs, along with his red haori. He carried a large scroll on his back, which puzzled Laxus slightly. Why did he bring it here? Stopping right in front of Jiraiya, Laxus gave the older man a mocking smile, which Jiraiya returned arrogantly. Ready to lose, Grandpa? Laxus taunted, letting tiny sparks fly through his body. Jiraiya let out a booming laugh, the kind an adult might make when told to take a child seriously. Laxus's mocking smile vanished, replaced by an angry frown. After calming down a bit from his fit of laughter, Jiraiya sat with his hands on his hips, looking nonchalant. The day I lose will be the day I can finally kick the bucket. Come on, kid, let's see what you're made of. Begin. Laxus was the first to attack. The moment Elfman uttered the word, he was standing before Sage Gama in the blink of an eye. He delivered a knee strike to Jiraiya's torso that doubled him over in pain. His left fist flew like lightning toward Jiraiya's face, sending him flying through the air with its extreme strength and speed. As Jiraiya fell, writhing, Laxus kept his arms outstretched and began firing an endless barrage of tiny lightning bolts to maintain the pressure on his opponent. His other hand, which had been accumulating magical energy, joined the attack with slow but explosive beams that, combined with the ferocious blast, would keep Jiraiya at bay. As Jiraiya rolled on the ground, he suppressed the curse that ran through his mouth. That hit wasn't so bad, he commented reluctantly. Doing a somersault to avoid falling on his back, he quickly looked up and saw a shower of lightning bolts heading voraciously towards him. Jiraiya leaped to his feet and began running across the stadium, concentrating chakra in his legs to dodge Laxus's intense attack. As he zigzagged through the labyrinth of lightning, he absent-mindedly assessed Laxus's strategy. It keeps me on the defensive, trying to force me to think of more ways to escape its traps and reveal the extent of my abilities. In fact, she concentrated chakra in her legs, tensing them as her hands moved rapidly among the seals. I'd better start taking it seriously. Jin-tun, Musho Swift Release, Shadowless Flight. Propelled forward at speeds he had only imagined in his dreams, Jiraiya's figure vanished, giving way to a dizzying game of dodging, zigzagging, leaping, and maneuvering through the rain of lightning that Laxus fueled with his magic. To observers, it was as if Jiraiya's movements were playing out in fast motion across the entire field, with multiple copies of himself following him. Laxus smiled victoriously as he felt Jiraiya's punch hurtling toward his face. Sensing it was coming from the right, he ducked, tilting his head to that side and letting himself fall with the momentum. As Jiraiya slowed down for a moment, clearly surprised that Laxus had anticipated his attack, Laxus slammed his right palm into the ground, simultaneously releasing the magic he had been gathering in his left leg. His leg crackled with lightning as he shouted his attack, Rankyaku, Storm Leg. His leg, crackling with electricity, slammed into Jiraiya with devastating force, making him scream in pain. Laxus's grin widened, until Jiraiya vanished in a puff of smoke. Surprise wiped the smug expression from his face. His eyes widened and his mouth fell open as he stared in disbelief at what had just happened. What the devil? Rasengan, spiral sphere. The ground beneath his feet exploded as a blue sphere slammed into his stomach, sending him flying. Gritting his teeth in pain and hurled high above the ground, Laxus cracked open one eye to see Jiraiya inside a hole that had been right beneath him. Her eyes widened in understanding. That's it. The two types of magic he used were speed magic and earth magic. Charging his body with magic, his form flickered and transformed into a beam before he hurtled toward Earth. As he landed, the gong sounded, signaling the end of his trial. Wincing at the wound on his body, Laxus waited for Jiraiya to emerge from his hole before beginning to explain his observations. You use speed magic to dodge my lightning blast and try to land a few blows. When I used Rankyaku, you must have used clone magic while moving quickly to confuse and disorient me. Finally, to ensure your last attack hit me, you used earth magic to hide beneath me, though I have no idea how you managed to time it perfectly. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at the sight of the slightly panting boy and nodded with a smile. Very observant of you to pick up on those details in the middle of a fight. Most people focus solely on defeating their enemies with brute force to finish as quickly as possible, especially when they have no idea what they're capable of. Jiraiya, chin in hand, hummed thoughtfully for a few moments before speaking. Approved. I didn't expect you to grasp the clone thing, just the first and last. My advice is to brush up on a few more types of magic before accepting your first S-class mission. If you had, you would have realized that my last attack falls into the energy creation category. He chuckled as Laxus brought his hand to his face and muttered curses barely audible above the wind. Second tent. When Laxus entered, looking well except for his bandaged torso, Makarov looked at Kana. Well, Kana, since we're going in the order of the chosen ones, that means you'll be the next participant. Good luck. Nodding with a resolute expression, the brunette rose from her seat and marched through the tent flaps toward the stadium. Fairy Tale Exam Grounds. Kana, squinting at the sudden brightness, blinked rapidly to clear her vision as she nervously walked toward the center of the room. When her vision cleared and she no longer needed to blink, her eyes fell curiously on the woman standing next to Elfman. Interestingly, that reaction quickly turned into surprise and embarrassment upon observing the woman's clothing. The woman had light brown eyes, without pupils, and black hair with blue highlights, tied back in a short, spiky, open ponytail. With a curvy figure, like some girls in the guild would likely develop as they grew up, her clothing was, at best, questionable, and at worst, atrocious. A tan coat with a purple inner seam that barely covered her tight-fitting mesh suit, which reached from her neck to her thighs. An orange miniskirt was all that preserved her modesty, held up by a dark blue belt with a kind of sash. Shin guards and sandals completed her outfit. My God! After glancing at the stands, Kana's fear was confirmed. All the men were staring at her, unquestioning of her intentions. With a mental groan, Kana approached her opponent in exasperation. Why do I have to fight against a would-be prostitute? Muttering incoherently about her day, Kana sighed as she approached the brazen woman. So close. She could have sworn she saw a glimpse of her privates when the woman puffed out her chest. Fuck my life. Time jump. Naruto crossed his arms as he left the tent with the other candidates, all of them wearing serious expressions. The knowledge test had served its purpose. It had demonstrated how they reacted to an opponent using unknown magic. It had reviewed their knowledge of the different types of magic, and it had shown their level of preparedness for the unexpected. However, it was the test of knowledge that highlighted the differences between them. When Kana faced Anko, the young brunette received a beating that enraged the crowd against Anko. She was only able to identify two types of magic Anko used: poison and speed magic, but she suffered numerous injuries of varying severity. Judging by the look of disappointment in her eyes, she clearly expected to have done better. Urza's opponent had been incredibly annoying. He kept her on the defensive with wooden stakes launched from the ground, forcing her to remain in her flight armor to avoid the attack. To make matters worse, Tenzo had transformed the entire area into a vast swamp, which he then turned into a continuous quagmire. Urza had to resort to multiple armor changes in midair in fractions of a second, from her flight armor to move at unprecedented speed, to her black wing armor to soar through the skies. She seemed satisfied with her performance, though she had engaged in a conversation with Setsuna about how to correct her mistakes. Unlike the previous round, Mira Jane managed to complete the trial 30 seconds before time ran out. Jugo had used a type of transformation magic that transformed him into a monstrous form, greatly increasing his abilities. The second magic he used was an animal version of puppet magic, which he had heard about, involving using animals like birds to attack his enemies. Setsuna's fight didn't go as expected. Instead of fighting, she and Chojuro stared at each other for a while before Chojuro revealed the 3 types of magic he used in an expressionless and emotionless tone. Many learned a lesson that day. Setsuna possessed a supernatural ability to create high-level illusions. His match with Minma had been disappointingly short due to the 2-minute time limit, but it had been fun while it lasted. He wondered if the audience and the Magic Council would react to the aerial battle he'd just been in. Maybe they'd be scared shitless. It would be hilarious if that actually happened. Now they were preparing for the next test. Laxus stood at a distance, arms crossed, alternating between glaring at him and observing Mira Jane with that strange expression he'd seen when he arrived. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It seems that someone doesn't like a certain demon getting near me. He would have to keep an eye on Laxus's jealousy. While such things were normal, the hatred Laxus felt for him seemed strange. As Naruto watched Laxus with feigned interest, Mira Jane and Urza chatted animatedly to one side. "How are your S-class exams going, Mira?" Urza asked, her arms crossed over her armored chest, watching her rival with interest. For the past 6 months, she'd barely had time to talk to her, between demanding job applications that consumed almost all of her time, training with her most skilled and powerful friend, and trying to keep the guild running smoothly. Urza had very little time for herself. Besides, Mira Jane had also been very busy that semester, obviously trying to improve herself. Mira Jane grunted indifferently, waving her hand dismissively. "It's not as easy as I thought, that's for sure. Even so, I haven't formed an opinion yet. When I'm finished, I'll tell you what I think." Urza looked at her, puzzled. "So, what do you think about our chances of becoming an S-class?" Her response was immediate. "No way. We're facing Naruto-kun," she began, listing names, Laxus and Setsuna. "Any one of them could beat us, despite our improvements, and Kana pales in comparison. This is just an exhibition to show us how tough they are and force us to improve so we can take the next step." Her eyes locked onto Urza's with unusual intensity, silently daring her to contradict her words. Urza sighed, averting her gaze from Mira and stepping back slightly. "I see. That's why you didn't take the first trial as seriously as you should have." Mira Jane nodded silently, softening the intensity of her gaze with a more relaxed expression. "In my opinion, we're the lucky ones who got to experience the exam first. Next time, we'll crush it so badly that the master will have to create a new rule to prevent such a beating." She smiled at the thought. "Although, obviously, I'll become an S-class mage before you, Busty." Urza, with a mocking smile, looked at Mira Jane with a satisfied expression. "Humph. As always, you talk a lot, but never do anything. If anything, I'll become an S-class mage a year before you." Before the conversation could intensify, Makarov's footsteps drew everyone's attention. The old man stopped right in the center of the group, a position that was becoming his usual one, and crossed his arms. "All right, you brats, this is the final test you'll face in this exam. I know I said there would be 3 tests in a battle, but it was decided that the last 2 would be held simultaneously so as not to make this exam too long." Looking at them all with a proud yet cautious expression, Makarov continued with the news. "The final test for you will last at least 5 minutes in a battle against stronger enemies and with numerical superiority. Each of you will fight for yourself. The time limit will be half an hour. To make matters even more complicated, Gildarts will be participating in the test. Upon hearing the news, each participant had their own reaction. Laxus smiled, happy to have the opportunity to fight Fairy Tail's ace. Naruto and Setsuna raised their eyebrows with interest. Urza adopted a determined look. Mirajane paled slightly, but cracked her knuckles threateningly, and Kana swallowed audibly. Seeing their expressions, Makarov smiled bitterly. As I said, the goal is to last at least 5 minutes. You don't need to defeat any opponent to pass. I wish you all the best of luck in this test. I hope all of you excellent mages will achieve the rank of S-class mage by the end of the day. With a wry smile, Makarov turned to face the stands. Naruto turned outside and raised an eyebrow at the sight of Gildarts Clive looking at him with a hint of irritation. He didn't know what he'd done to deserve that look, but he didn't care. The S-class exam would soon be over, and he could go home and pay his respects to Setsuna's body, as he often did. He shook his head slightly, pushing the image of Setsuna naked from his mind. Now is not the time to get excited. It would be embarrassing and would give a bad impression to those watching us. Walking towards the others, who had gone ahead to the center of the enclosure, Naruto gave a mocking smile. So what should I use? Fire Dragon Slayer magic is a must. It would leave those grumpy, old council members trembling with fear. Kawarimi is also essential. I think I should take it easy on the others and save my best weapons for Gildarts. I wonder how he fights. Are all the contestants ready? Elfman shouted, raising his hand to signal the start of the final challenge. Seeing no objections, he quickly lowered his hand. Begin. A lightning-fast fist hurtled toward Naruto as Laxus moved at full speed, hoping to catch the blonde boy off guard. When his fist collided with Naruto's flesh, a groan of pain and surprise escaped his target's lips. A satisfied smile spread across Laxus's face. He was immediately thrown off balance by the ridiculously fast punch that landed squarely on his face, accompanied by the characteristic crack of body parts breaking. Thrown backward with a groan of pain, Laxus's body vanished in a flash and soared into the sky. Ignoring Laxus's retreat, Naruto launched a spinning kick that Mirajane, rapidly approaching, dodged with a leap. Using her momentum, she performed a front flip, intending to deliver a spinning kick to Naruto's head as she prepared her soul extinction spell. Grimacing in pain as Naruto expertly blocked her kick with his left hand, she cast the spell, and a tiny black sphere of crackling energy appeared. Soul extinction, she shouted, aiming it directly at his face. As he extended his right hand toward the spell, a Rasengan of equal size appeared out of nowhere, with 3 even smaller ones swirling around it. Mini Wakasei Rasengan. He whispered the name of the jutsu just before it collided with Mirajane's spell. The results were explosive. When Naruto's jutsu made contact with Myra's spell, the distorted rotations of the individual Rasengan, created by the central and smaller ones spinning in opposite directions, interacted with each other, forming a massive, turbulent vortex that launched Mirajane into the atmosphere. Simultaneously, Myra's soul extinction unleashed a powerful and destructive energy beam that fiercely battled Naruto's jutsu. Smiling mockingly at his predicament, Naruto swiftly dispelled the jutsu, allowing Mirajane's attack to pierce through the remaining chakra and hurtle toward him. He then replaced himself with Laxus, who swooped down toward him in his lightning form. Although it had been somewhat awkward to transform into lightning, he managed to execute the jutsu and watched as the black lightning bolt slammed into the other blonde. Landing on his feet like a cat, Naruto briefly admired the damage caused by the spell before turning his attention to Urza, who was facing Setsuna and Kana. From what he could see, no one had yet faced Gildarts, and the old man seemed pleased about it. Concentrating chakra in his throat, Naruto leaped into the air and unleashed a fire dragon's roar at Gildarts. After reading Gildarts' file, he was incredibly curious about his disintegration and dismantling magic. As the blazing attack hurtled toward Gildarts, a shadow clone appeared next to the original and extended its hands toward Mira Jane, who was descending. Wind release. Divine fist of the wind god. A gust of wind in the shape of a fist struck the transformation mage, sending her flying into the women's fight, unfolding some distance away. The original, however, watched Gildarts in action. When the jet of fire headed toward him, the old man reached out into the flames. His hand glowed faintly with a white light, and suddenly, Naruto saw his flames explode in a brilliant flash. What the devil? Surprised to see Gildart's magic in action, Naruto barely managed to catch Urza's downward slash. Growling softly, he slammed his head into hers violently and shook the now disoriented re-equipped mage off him. Fire Dragon Iron Fist. A blazing right hook sent Urza sliding backward, reeling from the force of the blow. Seizing the opportunity, Naruto delivered a spinning kick to the redhead and grabbed her leg as she stumbled. Spinning her once, twice, and 3 times, he launched her straight at Setsuna and shot off towards Laxus, who was moving at full speed in his lightning body, trying to land as many blows as he could on anyone who crossed his path. Of course, Setsuna's appearance with the Leaf Village's signature body flicker technique, the Blackbeard descending in a vertical slash, deterred him from his objective. As swift as Urza's re-equip, Samahata appeared in her hands and blocked the Blackbeard's descent. Naruto and Setsuna glared at each other, their Sharingan locked in a visual battle. Their hands executed different one-handed seals, though Naruto's sequence was shorter. Katon, Goka Makakyu. Fire Element. Great Fire Annihilation. Enten, Koken no Tate. Flame Release. Black Flame Shield. As Naruto's crimson flames engulfed the stage, Setsuna enveloped herself in black flames that formed a protective cocoon, withstanding the heat. Behind her, the other competitors did their best to avoid the flames spreading across the ground. Laxus and Mirajane launched themselves into the air. The former used his lightning body spell, while the latter employed her partial transposition spell to reach safety. Urza, seeing the flames, donned her Empress of Flames armor and attacked Kana, who held firm despite the heat. Gildarts used his shock magic to disperse the flames before they could get any closer, though he squinted at the far-reaching fire spell Naruto had cast. He clenched his fist as he watched Naruto and Setsuna clash, their swords clashing and striking each other with deadly intent. These two, no matter what the master says, they'll have to be under constant surveillance. No one in Fairy Tail should attack another with malicious intent. Her brow furrowed even more as she watched Naruto substitute himself for Mirajane to avoid Setsuna's point-blank Chidori, Thousand Birds. Surprised by the sudden change in the situation, Mirajane ended up taking the moderately powerful lightning jutsu right in the chest. Luckily for her, the 5-minute bell rang, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious, as her substitution spell ended. Makarov, who was watching the event from his seat in the stands, frowned at Gildarts. The man hadn't moved a single step the entire time, only reacting defensively when an attack got too close. What was he thinking? Gildarts, why don't you face them as you should? Is your opinion of Naruto so bad that you can't keep the objective in mind? His aged eyes widened slightly as Gildarts finally made his move. 1 step, 2 steps, a light trot, a full-speed sprint. Yet, as he launched himself toward his target, Makarov's eyes widened. Surprisingly, it wasn't Naruto he was chasing. Laxus had no idea what had happened. 1 minute he and Urza had been exchanging blows, and the next, an impact sent him crashing to the ground with such force that he was instantly unconscious. Urza barely had time to try and defend herself before Gildarts knocked her out with a swift punch. The two shinobi broke off their skirmish and watched the scene intently. When Gildarts lunged at Kana, who seemed to shrink back, Setsuna locked eyes with Naruto, a question reflected in her gaze. And now? She blinked once. Yes. Setsuna nodded slightly and raised her hand. I wish to withdraw. I have already completed the required task and do not wish to continue. Elfman nodded sympathetically and bellowed. Setsuna Uchiha withdraws. The only remaining competitor is Naruto Uzumaki. The crowd roared in approval, eager to see Fairy Tail's ace take on the Demon King. Some were disappointed that Setsuna hadn't stayed to fight, but they straightened in their seats, anticipating the upcoming battle. Gildarts stared at the blond man, gently placed the unconscious Kana on the ground, and stood up. So they call you the Demon King, huh? Naruto raised an eyebrow as he hoisted Samahata onto his shoulder, ignoring its whimpers. So what? Gildarts felt excited, despite what he thought of the boy. Nothing. I just thought you'd be something bigger than you look. They say you can kick at least 3 mountains with one kick. Naruto broke out in a cold sweat. Where on earth did that come from? Changing position, he now raised Samahata towards Gildarts in a gesture of challenge. Are you ready to fight? Gildarts frowned. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm not good at holding back, and you've been fighting for a while now. Are you sure you don't want to break? Of course, he wanted to beat the kid senseless, but he had to at least give him a chance to back down before things got ugly. Naruto frowned. His body posture remained the same, except for the way he gripped his hands. They both became tense. They both jumped. Time jump. In the safety of his study, Naruto detached the scroll Jiraiya had dropped from his arm. With Setsuna back at the guild celebrating Urza's promotion to S-class mage, the house was quiet and relatively peaceful. Looking at the scroll again, Naruto frowned. The scroll was much shorter than I'd expected. That was pretty bad. Jiraiya always sent very long reports full of absurd claims. For him to send such a short message, something bad must have happened. After breaking the seal that protected the scroll from prying eyes, Naruto unrolled it and read. He's found out about your activities. Mira Jane Strauss is one of his targets. Screw your father. The scroll slipped from Naruto's hands, falling to the ground with a clatter as his eyes bulged. Impossible, impossible. One of Jiraiya's tactics for transmitting sensitive information was to hide the message within bland text. The first words of each sentence contained the message, preventing those unaware of the trick from being deceived. If I rearranged the message, it would read like this. He is the father of Mira Jane Strauss. Naruto frowned at the news. I knew I should have tagged him then. Clenching and loosening his fist, he took a deep breath with a shiver. Opening his eyes, a cold fire burned in them. Well, Elfman said that he wanted me to help his sisters. Why on earth did all this happen to him? Isla Tenru. The sleeping figure lay curled up, its face serene and peaceful. As it turned over, a large spider could be seen crawling towards it. Just as she was close enough to the figure, a wave of black energy struck and completely disintegrated her. The sleeper's face tensed. Tucson. In the small town of Harjin, daily life proceeded as usual as people awoke and went about their business. Everyone exchanged friendly smiles, warm greetings, and cheerful waves, except for one person in particular. Walking through Harjin with a disappointed gait, the young woman surveyed the place. She had brown eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, tied back in a small ponytail on the right side with colorful ribbons, the rest of it loose. What drew the most attention, especially from men and some women, were her enormous breasts, barely contained by the blue and white striped blouse she wore. Her curvaceous figure, adorned with a blue skirt that barely reached mid-thigh, attracted glances wherever she went. Several keys dangled from her brown belt, which seemed to be the only thing holding up her blouse and skirt. A whip, its end shaped like a heart, also stirred rather undesirable fantasies in some men. Her black high-heeled boots clicked softly as she walked through Harjin. With a sigh of despair, Lucy Hiarphilia ran a hand through her hair. Great, just great. Not a single shop selling anything related to magic. Damn it. Huffing at her predicament, the blonde decided to head back to her hotel. She sighed as she walked through the streets. What a disappointment. Excuse me, a young man called to her as Lucy passed a library. His call pulled her from her reverie, making her jump slightly and turn toward him. He looked quite ordinary. He had that bland, nothing good in life look that seemed to characterize some young people these days. Are you looking for a magic shop in town? I couldn't help but overhear your comments, and I'd like to help you, he said, bowing politely to the buxom blonde. Lucy looked at the man with a mixture of disdain, but she was still curious. Really? I've looked everywhere and haven't found a single magic shop. She crossed her arms, unconsciously bringing them together and making them look larger. Are you trying to pull some dumb blonde prank on me or something? The man shook his head vigorously, trying to keep her gaze from straying to his upright chest. No, nothing like that. My great-uncle has a shop a couple of blocks from here, and business hasn't been great lately, he explained. When I heard you were looking for a magic shop, I thought I'd take you there to help him out and maybe even bring in some more customers. Lucy gave him a searching look as he nervously shifted about, trying to detect any deception or ill intent in the stranger. After a few moments, she shrugged and gestured with her hand. All right, I suppose I could let you come with me, though I'm warning you, if this is a joke. Her raised fist elicited a nervous chuckle from the man. Oh, sure. Follow me. It's a bit confusing to follow this route. Hargent Station. Meanwhile, at Hargent Station, a small crowd had gathered around Terminal 1, watching the scene unfold before them with a mixture of amazement and amusement. In the center of the group were three people, two men and a woman. One of the men was hunched over on the floor, desperately trying to suppress the vomit that threatened to erupt from his stomach, while the other two sighed in exasperation. A small blue cat was also beside the dizzy boy, patting him on the back like a child, trying to calm his best friend. Natsu, isn't it a little ridiculous to get kicked in the butt by a train without even trying? Of course, what he considered relaxing was something entirely different for the knockdown dragon slayer. Natsu had grown since the S-class exams. His hair had become even spikier, sticking out in all directions, to the point of resembling a rat's nest, according to Gray. His clothes were still the same, except now they were a size larger, and his physique had become deceptively thin and scaly-looking. At nearly twice his previous height, the young mage had grown quite a bit. Suppressing the urge to vomit on Happy, Natsu shot him a look he hoped wasn't angry, but ended up looking like he was actually constipated. Shut up, Happy. Ugh, I don't feel well, he groaned. The girl laughed wearily at the situation, wondering if she would have to do this for her boyfriend every time they went out together. She put on gloves, approached Natsu, and knelt beside him. Hang on, Natsu-kun, I'll take care of it, she said. She pressed her gloved palm against his forehead. A light green energy enveloped her, and in seconds Natsu's nausea vanished. She removed her palm from his forehead and stood up with a satisfied expression. That should do it, right, Natsu-kun? Natsu, who already looked healthy, jumped to his feet and smiled gratefully. Thank you for healing me. I feel so much better now. You're the best, Lisanna. Like her boyfriend, Lisanna had changed over the years. She'd traded her short hair for a shoulder-length mane with slightly curled ends. She'd also grown quite a bit taller, now only a centimeter shorter than Natsu. She'd traded her simple pink dress and red shoes for a black vest, a blue t-shirt, blue jeans with a silver chain, and black shoes with blue socks. Her figure had become more feminine and attracted a lot of attention from men. Her large breasts and curvy figure made some mutter under their breath. Lucky guy. The third person just laughed at the scene. How about we leave before you two start making out passionately? We don't have much time, and I don't want to hear your brother rant about how real men are punctual, Lisanna. She rolled her eyes, ignoring the intense blush that Natsu had felt upon hearing her words. Please, Naruto, you just want to go back and do unspeakable things with Setsuna and Mirane. She chided him playfully and lightly. Naruto winked mischievously and headed toward the village. Of all the guild members, Naruto had changed the least. He still wore the same outfit he'd had since his early days in Fairy Tail, though he'd occasionally switch to a short-sleeved version when it got too hot, and he still carried a sword on his back. It wasn't Samahata, though. It was wrapped in black cloth, but shaped like an enormous dog's fawn. The blade was firmly attached to his back, almost dangling from his thoughts. His hair had also changed length. Instead of wearing it short and even, he'd grown out the right side, while keeping the left short, so his hair fell across the right side of his face. It certainly resembled a short version of Madara's hairstyle, though it reached his shoulders. "Come on, the sooner we finish, the sooner we can leave," he exclaimed, nearing the exit. Lisana turned to Natsu and narrowed her eyes. "Come on, Natsu-kun, let's go." Running toward their sensei, with Natsu and Happy hot on their heels, the group entered Harjan City. Meanwhile, Lucy found herself browsing the wares of Harjan's only magic shop with disappointment. Most of the items the old man was selling were quite weak, more useful for magic tricks than combat. Sighing again, she turned to the shopkeeper. "Excuse me, but do you happen to have any portal keys?" she asked as she approached him at the counter. The old man frowned thoughtfully at her request. "Now that I think about it, I believe I have some keys to the door somewhere. Give me a minute. I'm waiting for a customer to come and pick up their order." Lucy walked quietly to the back of the shop, watching the old man's back with a faint hope. Perhaps coming here wasn't a waste of time after all, she thought. She went to another section of the store and rummaged through some items, looking for something interesting in the pile. After several minutes of searching through the objects, Lucy came out of her reverie when she heard the door open and footsteps approaching the counter. Glancing around, Lucy gasped in astonishment at the sight of the person who had just entered the drab shop she was in. She quickly scurried away down the nearby aisle and covered her mouth with her hands, trying to stifle the fanatical squeal that threatened to erupt. "Oh my God, it's Naruto Uzumaki, the Demon King from Fairy Tail himself." After thanking whoever was listening, she stood up and took the first item she saw before slowly heading to the counter. Naruto hurried over to the counter and rang the bell. "Hey, Grandpa, don't tell me you haven't finished your favorite customer's order yet." He leaned against the counter as the man hurried back with a wide grin on his face. "Well, if it isn't Naruto-kun. It's been a long time since I've seen you around here. How are you and Miss Strauss?" The man tapped a box in front of the blonde mage, who raised an eyebrow. The box was about the size of Happy and wrapped in purple paper, which made Naruto smile slightly at the old man's choice of color. "Lisana's fine. She sends her regards, by the way." After placing the package in a sealed envelope, Naruto crossed his arms and stood up straight. "How much was it?" he asked, searching for his wallet in his shirt pocket. The old man frowned. "Are you leaving already? You usually stay for a drink before you go." "Excuse me," a new voice interrupted, causing Naruto and the old man to turn their attention to Lucy, who had her arms crossed and was trying to look annoyed. The blush on her cheeks and the fact that her eyes kept staring at Naruto ruined the effect. "I thought you were going to get me some portal keys. Did something happen?" she asked. Naruto looked at the old man with a questioning expression as the man clenched his fist as if he had just remembered. "Oh, I almost forgot. Right away, miss." The old man, who had run back to where he had gone the first time, left the shop in a somewhat awkward silence. Now that she had gotten rid of the shopkeeper, Lucy found herself struggling to find a way to break the ice with the famous magician. Could I talk about the weather?" "No, that's been done to death." Your sword?" "No, what if you ask me why I'm interested?" "Ark, damn it, Lucy, you should have thought this through." She mentally scolded herself, nervously glancing anywhere but at Naruto. A giggle pulled her from her thoughts, and her blush deepened at the sound of his voice. "Hello, I'm almost certain you know who I am, but I'll introduce myself anyway. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, though I'm also known as the Demon King." He began, turning to have her full attention. "So you're a celestial spirit mage, miss?" Swallowing her gasp at the thought of the Demon King speaking to her, Lucy stammered as she hurriedly introduced herself. "Why, you can call me Lucy. It's a pleasure to meet you, Uzumaki-san," she exclaimed enthusiastically, giving a quick bow. Straightening her posture, she giggled nervously at his amused expression. "Yes, I use celestial spirits as a mage." Naruto smiled. "That's very interesting, Lucy-san. Out of curiosity, how many portal keys do you have?" The old man took advantage of the moment to return, holding a small wooden box with a silver pattern. As he brushed it against Naruto's palm, he delicately and stealthily dropped a piece of paper into his pocket. Naruto immediately closed his hand and put the note there while the old man entertained Lucy with his portal key. After accepting the box from the man, Lucy gave the old man a curious and cheerful look. "How much does the key to the dog gate cost?" she asked. The old man made the peace sign. 20,000 jewels, no discounts or markdowns included. Lucy froze. Her happiness vanished like water in the desert as the price circled in her head. Damn it, I can't afford to spend that much. How am I going to pay the rent? He approached the old man with a forced smile. Excuse me, how much did you say it was? 20,000 jewels. Before Lucy could even think about using her charm to try and strike a deal with the old man, Naruto stepped forward with a huge wad of Joya bills. This should cover my order and your gate key, right, Gigi? He ignored Lucy's surprised look and handed the bills to the old man, who counted them with a self-satisfied expression. Well, that settles everything. See you soon, Naruto-kun. Don't get lost. Naruto waved to the man and gestured for the surprised girl to follow him. Upon exiting the shop, Naruto only had to wait 2 seconds before Lucy burst in as well. Naruto-san, wait. Seeing her run toward him, Naruto stopped and waited for her to catch up. As she did, she looked at him with a confused expression. Why? Why did you pay for the portal key? I appreciate the gesture, but we barely know each other, and it's strange that someone would do that for me, she explained. Naruto shrugged slightly. Well, I guess you're right, but I just felt like helping out. You seem to be having some financial difficulties, so I decided to put my spare cash to good use. Besides, it was a drop in the ocean compared to what I make in a day. I had nothing to lose, only gain, he explained, turning his head toward a nearby clock. Lee-Sena and Natsu should have finished by now. You'd better hurry and go meet them in the center of town. Noticing his gesture and correctly interpreting its meaning, Lucy mustered her courage and asked the question she'd been wanting to ask him ever since she'd seen him in that shop. Thanks for the help. I hope I'm not bothering you, she began, nervously clasping her hands behind her back. But I was wondering if you could help me join Fairy Tail. Naruto blinked. Do you want to join Fairy Tail? She clasped her hands together, making her breasts bounce in a way that tempted Naruto to gaze at them. Yes, it's been a goal of mine for a long time. I've dreamed of joining since I was a little girl. Fairy Tail is so cool, wild, and exciting. Especially the S-class mages, like you and Mira Jane. She seemed lost in thought, surrounded by stars as she fantasized about the guild's powerful mages. Naruto paused, scanning her before focusing on his portal keys. Fairy Tail doesn't have any celestial spirit mages, so I don't see why Makarov wouldn't let her join. Nodding once, her eyes sparkled with amusement at the way Lucy's eyes lit up. Sure, why don't you come with me? Some other guild members are here, so I plan to meet them in the center of town at 1 o'clock. In 5 minutes, she suggested, glancing at the nearby clock. Lucy's shout of joy was all he needed to hear. Lee-Sena and Natsu, city center. Things weren't going well for the young couple. Earlier that day, Natsu had heard a rumor that Salamander from Fairy Tail was going to give a concert at 1 o'clock. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered him, but as far as he knew, he was Salamander, and it hadn't even occurred to him to perform at the guild, much less in front of strangers. Since this was very personal for Natsu, they had gone to confront the imposter and, possibly, give him a good beating. As they walked toward the center of town, they could make out the crowd of girls shouting Salamander, with love-struck expressions. As they approached, Lee-Sena began to feel something strange. Her body temperature quickened, almost as it did every time she saw Natsu, and she felt her face burn. As they drew closer to the crowd, the sensation intensified. Her eyes sharpened as she recognized the magic being used. Enchantment magic. How despicable and highly suspicious. Why would he use illegal magic in broad daylight? What will he say when he's caught? Breaking free from the magical influence, Lee-Sena quickened her pace and scrutinized the faces of the girls present. As she suspected, They were all under the imposter's control. Pushing her way through the women, Lisanna managed to get a good look at Salamander. He was a relatively tall and thin man with short, slightly spiky, bluish hair that stood out, with a long fringe falling over the upper left side of his face. He had a slightly rectangular face with sharp features, dark eyes, and thin, dark eyebrows. His most distinctive facial feature was the dark tattoo that covered the right side of his forehead, just above his right eyebrow. She wore ornate clothing, most notably a dark, high-collared cloak that reached almost to her knees, with a lighter lining and lighter edges adorned with a pattern of aligned diamonds. It fastened a few centimeters below the collar with a brooch decorated with a stylized flame. Underneath the cloak, she wore a simple, light-colored, short-sleeved shirt with outlined edges, matching light-colored pinstriped trousers with visible hems, held up by a simple belt with elegant polka dots hidden beneath the shirt. She wore dark, polished shoes with lighter soles and lighter uppers that extended from the ankle. She also sported 3 large metal bracelets on her right wrist and forearm. "Natsu," she whispered, catching his attention. "This guy's using charm magic on those girls." She felt a shiver of disgust as the imposter shamelessly began groping one of the voluptuous girls. "If we don't stop him, he'll not only ruin your reputation, but he'll also make the Magic Council even angrier with Fairy Tale." Natsu instantly flew into a rage at that blue-haired idiot. "What? Let me attack him. I'll make him pay for disrespecting Fairy Tale." He readied his fists to carry out his threat when Lisanna grabbed him. Lisanna held Natsu back as he growled at the imposter, who was using very low-level fire magic to dazzle the crowd. "Natsu-kun, calm down. Beat him up after he breaks the charm spell, not before," she whispered furiously in his ear. "Honestly, sometimes he's so impulsive that I feel like hitting him." Happy, who had been watching the man intently from the sky, exclaimed in surprise, "Natsu, Lisanna, I know that magician." He quickly went to his adoptive parents and relayed the information he had about the man. "It's Bora the Prominent, a former member of the Titan Nose Guild. He was expelled for using his magic to aid in robberies, and there were rumors that he was involved in slavery. The Magic Council has put a price on his head because he supposedly stole some important documents they want to recover." The Fire Dragon Slayer calmed down, glaring at Bora as he continued his outlandish performance. "So if I manage to capture this guy and bring him before the Magic Council, that'll reflect well on Fairy Tale?" he asked, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. Happy nodded. "Yes." Lisanna shrugged, focused on dispelling the effects of the spell. Just as Naruto had taught her, she manipulated her magical energy to flow through the bodies of the girls around her. If she had done this 4 years ago, it would have been impossible and would have taken a great deal of effort to achieve such precise control. Now, she could do it instantly and applied even greater force to disrupt the flow of magic from whoever had cast it. It was a technique that Naruto had taught him, Jinjutsu Kai, Jinjutsu Dissipation. Releasing her magic from the women's bodies, who suddenly blinked in confusion and no longer felt lust, she turned to Natsu and nodded. "Go and beat him up." She smiled. With great pleasure, approaching Bora, Natsu's smile turned ruthless. He wasn't sure and said he was going to enjoy this. "Hey, fire imposter," he yelled. Bora spun around with a sneer, and Natsu's fist slammed into his face. The blow was so hard it broke his nose, and the Dragon Slayer heard the cartilage crack. Bora staggered back, spitting blood and broken teeth. Bora glared at Natsu and growled, "Who the hell are you?" Natsu grinned as flames began to engulf his body. "Let me show you how to truly use fire magic." Asa Nawatari, Morning Chicken, Naruto, and Lucy. The 2 blondes were heading towards the city center at a brisk pace. Or, to be precise, Lucy was jogging while Naruto approached his adorable students. They had certainly grown since he started teaching them. He let out a nostalgic chuckle as he recalled various parts of his training. Natsu falling before the Seningoroshi just like when he was a child. Mira Jane continuously propelling herself out of the water and into the air while practicing water walking. Gray crashing into his ice every time he failed with the Makio Hyosho, demon reflecting ice crystals. Kana being forced to search for him every time she got trapped in an animal's body, and Lisana causing craters every time she touched something. Elfman continued training with him, but due to the increase in job requests, he had begun to disappear from the guild at random intervals. A sudden explosion jolted him out of his reverie, and he sighed in exasperation as Lucy stared at the blast in shock. "What the hell? What happened?" she yelled. Naruto placed his hand on her shoulder, forcing her to turn and face him. He wore a weary expression that did nothing to calm her nerves. "Unfortunately, you'll have to get used to this if you join Fairy Tail. Judging by the explosion and the amount of fire, it's probably Natsu's doing. That stupid brat." He listlessly began walking toward the source of the explosion. Lucy quickened her pace until she was right next to him. Curiosity etched on her face. "Wait a minute, you mean Natsu the salamander is here in Harjan with you?" At his silent nod, she asked another question. "Is it true that he can use fire in 1,000 ways, like to fly, eat it, and even use it to grab things?" Naruto glanced at her sideways. "Why don't we ask her in person?" Natsu. Natsu was having a blast beating Bora up all over town. I mean, who wouldn't enjoy punishing someone who tried to steal their identity and use their reputation to get them into trouble? Besides, Bora's actions would have made anyone who crossed paths with him look down on Fairy Tail. That couldn't happen while he was in charge. By then, everyone except Lisana and Happy had left, screaming in fear as Bora flew off into various shops and stores. Natsu had to admit the guy was pretty tough. He'd taken the full force of his Asa Nawatari and was still able to hold his own, though Natsu pointed out he could have defeated him even without Naruto's training. Ruororg. Die. Bora roared as he unleashed one of his most powerful spells, Typhon of Prominence. Spreading his arms wide, Bora focused a large portion of his magic into the spell. A magic circle appeared before his chest, from which a spiraling column of purple fire erupted and hurtled toward the dragon's lair. Natsu grinned, launching himself straight into the flames. He relished the look of terror on Bora's face as he ran toward him unharmed despite being engulfed in flames. Leaping toward the imposter with a powerful magical boost, Natsu's body erupted in flames far brighter than Bora's faint flames. Spinning at speeds Bora thought impossible, Natsu announced his attack upon impact, Fire Dragon Sword Drill. Bora screamed as Natsu's spinning headbutt slammed into his body. The flames, now more intense, burned him severely, and the force of the impact shattered him even further. But Natsu didn't give up. He flipped his body, ignited his feet, and launched a Fire Dragon Claw straight at Bora's face, knocking him unconscious. As Natsu moved away from his position and began to drag the body, Lisana watched him with a sigh. "Naruto and I isn't going to be happy about this." Again, Natsu clutched his throbbing head with trembling hands, tears threatening to spill from the pain. The pain had forced him to crouch down on the ground to bear it. Naruto, his eyes narrowed and his expression serious, stood over Natsu's inert body, his emotions mirroring his own. His fist was raised, the same one that had stunned him moments before. "Are you telling me that, despite everything I told you about not drawing attention to yourself, you forgot at the moment I said it?" he asked sharply, his tone clear. Natsu narrowed one eye at his brother. But he was using my name to pick up girls. And he was going to make Fairy Tail look bad. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. That earned him another blow to the head, this one less painful. As Natsu groaned again, Naruto sighed in exasperation. That's why Gray would have been more suitable for this. Sure, Gray would probably have reacted the same way as Natsu, but he wouldn't have resorted to force from the start. Gray would expose him in front of everyone, revealing him for the cunning scoundrel he was, and would only beat him up if he dared to attack first. "Natsu," Naruto began, "I don't mind that you want to defend the guild's name. I don't mind that you want to punish the man who tried to use your name to ruin lives and cause trouble for others." His tone had softened noticeably, but the firmness remained. What I? Anger sits that you didn't care at all about what surrounded you or the effect your fight had on him. Looking around the center of the village, Naruto came across wrecked stalls, burn marks that disfigured the buildings with horrible black stains, and small flames that flickered on the stone floor. Natsu stood up with some difficulty, surveyed his handiwork, and smiled proudly. Well, I didn't cause as much damage this time, though I don't understand what the problem is. It's not like they couldn't rebuild it. The repairs would barely affect the guild's profits, he said, clasping his hands behind his neck. Naruto stared at him blankly, wondering briefly how much Natsu cared about those suffering the consequences of fairy tales' enthusiasm. Oh yeah? And what are the people whose livelihoods depend on their businesses supposed to do? Wait for you to reimburse them for the construction costs? How long will that take? How do you expect them to make ends meet? He took a step forward, noticing Natsu's eyes widen and his skin turn pale. What are you going to say to the officials for damaging private property? Huh? Natsu said nothing. What else could he say? He was the one who had jumped in recklessly, and he really needed to learn that his actions had consequences not only for himself, but for others as well. Naruto gripped his shoulder firmly. You can't keep accepting jobs with that attitude, Natsu. In the end, you're going to end up destroying something priceless or of great sentimental value to the client. And then what? What could you possibly do to make it up to them? Natsu opened and closed his mouth several times, each answer slipping through his fingers as Naruto's impassive gaze watched him. I don't know, he murmured, his eyes lowered and his fists clenched. Now that he had opened his eyes, Natsu felt an uncomfortable feeling wash over him. It throbbed in his chest and prevented him from meeting Naruto's gaze. He just wanted to curl up and be swallowed by the earth, to disappear until everyone forgot about the incident. Shame. That was the emotion I felt. Naruto's eyes softened slightly at the sight of his impulsive friend before returning to their stern expression. Natsu, he wanted this to be seared into his memory. You have a home you love, a guild you cherish, and a family you love dearly. How can you rejoice in the destruction of other guilds and buildings if you've never experienced their pain? He asked. Natsu winced. Every time Naruto lectured him, he always managed to make the Dragon Slayer feel much smaller than usual, and that was saying something, especially considering how vehement Natsu could be in justifying his actions. Each time they did this, Naruto would point out something Natsu hadn't even considered, something related to his blunder, and he would insist until he was sure Natsu understood the consequences of his actions. Watching from a distance as the blonde man disciplined the Dragon Slayer, Lisanna, however, kept her gaze fixed on the blonde girl Naruto had brought with him. She was beautiful, Lisanna thought, with a natural, approachable beauty. From what she could gather from her appearance, she wasn't a combat mage like most of the fairy tale mages, but rather a support mage. Hearing the jingle of keys as the girl moved, Lisanna raised an eyebrow, recognizing them. A celestial spirit mage? Is she thinking of joining Fairy Tail? Lucy, who had been nervously watching from the sidelines as Naruto continued talking to Natsu, noticed the girl who had been with the pink-haired dragon slayer staring at her. With a nervous smile, Lucy greeted the white-haired girl, who returned the greeting with a smile. Feeling more confident that she hadn't been misunderstood, Lucy began to approach. Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Lucy, she said, extending her hand to shake it. Lisanna smiled and shook Lucy's hand with a soft but firm grip. Nice to meet you too. My name is Lisanna Strauss, and I'm Naruto-sensei's third student. Lucy gasped in surprise. You're his student? Wow, you must be really strong, she exclaimed. Leaning forward, she lowered her voice to whisper to Lisanna. Is it true that Naruto-san is dating your sister Mirajane? I heard some rumors in the weekly Sorcerer's magazine that they were together. Lisanna giggled, her eyes sparkling with excitement at the juicy gossip. They're not actually dating, but I think it's only a matter of time before they get together. Naruto-kun and Mirane have gotten along well since the day they met, so I'm not surprised the sorcerer thinks that. Happy, whom Lisanna was carrying, took advantage of the moment to make himself heard. Yes, Mira Jane adores Naruto. Lisa patted him on the head. Come on, come on, Happy, don't bother them. Hey, Lucy, wouldn't you be interested in joining Fairy Tail? She asked. Ignoring the talking cat, Lucy smiled and nodded happily. Yes, of course. I ran into Naruto by chance at a magic shop, so I asked him if he could take me to Fairy Tail, and he said yes. I'm super excited and can't wait to meet the other guild members, she exclaimed enthusiastically. As the girls continued chatting, Naruto gave them a quick look before shaking his head. Look, think about it for a bit, okay? I know you prefer to charge in with your fists, but sometimes it's best to think before you act, you know. With another soft sigh, he headed to the train station. I just hope Tayuya and Anko-chan figure something out soon. She thought that attracting everyone's attention. Still absorbed in his problems, he didn't make a sound as they all rushed to catch up with him. Jiraiya hasn't reported anything unusual, but someone like Naraku obviously wouldn't just sit idly by. Naraku would have to die soon. He was clearly a danger, but even he had his uses. There was also the matter of the Daybreak organization, which Setsuna and Kurami had told him about. Several years had passed, but nothing had been heard from them, if they were even in Earthland. And then there were the problems Laxus was causing him. I had so many things to do and so little time to work. Time jump. The train journey had been quite pleasant. Naruto entertained Lucy with his questions about Fairy Tail and its members, while Lisana spoke sweetly to Natsu, who was suffering from motion sickness. They were lucky to find a train back to Magnolia quickly, as in some cases the wait could be up to an hour. Happy flitted around their compartment. Naruto couldn't tell if it was out of boredom or some strange curiosity. So, who's the strongest in the guild? Is it the master? Lucy asked, her gaze fixed on Naruto. She'd been like this for a while, asking him, Lisana, and Natsu questions, but never taking her eyes off him. Naruto shook his head. Not necessarily. There have been cases where guilds have S-class members or mages who are stronger than the guild masters. It's a very common misconception that being the guild master equates to being the strongest member of the guild, he explained. In Fairy Tail, almost everyone is weaker than the master in terms of strength and power, Lisana continued, catching Lucy's attention. For both men and women, the title of strongest is up for grabs. For example, we have Titania Urza, the demon Mira Jane, the trickster Queen Kana, and the demon king's crow Setsuna. They all qualify for that title, but that makes it difficult to assess. Lucy blinked at that. She'd heard of the infamous Titania, the seductive demon, and even the deceiver queen, but she couldn't quite place the latter's face. What do you mean that makes it harder? Shouldn't they all fight and see who's left standing? She asked, trying to remember who Lisana was referring to as the Demon King's crow. Lisana frowned, gently stroking Natsu's sickly-looking back. No, that wouldn't work. They know each other so well they could predict each other's movements even in their sleep. Besides, their abilities give them advantages over one another. For example, Urza specializes in re-equip magic and weapons, which complement each other perfectly. Mirane's transformation magic, Satan's Soul, greatly enhances her abilities and allows her to dominate in close combat. When she's in that state, she practically always has the upper hand, Lisana said. A giggle from Naruto distracted them. That's not what I saw 2 nights ago, he muttered, just low enough that Natsu couldn't hear him despite his sharp hearing. Lisana looked at Naruto with a puzzled expression for a couple of seconds, but attributed it to something else and continued with her lesson. As I was saying, they would be so evenly matched that there wouldn't be a decisive outcome if they fought. Most likely, they would both collapse from exhaustion, and the fight would remain unresolved once again. Now, in my opinion, Setsuna-chan should be the strongest, but for some reason, she rejects the title. She has more combat experience than Mirane and Urza, she's smarter than Kana, and she's one of the few mages capable of keeping up with Naruto-sensei. Lucy gasped. What? He can even take on the Demon King? She exclaimed breathlessly. After all, everyone had heard of the Demon King's exploits. how he had wiped out several powerful dark guilds using only clawed gauntlets and a massive amount of magical energy. He had captured the attention of the magical community after his S-Class exam when he was 13, becoming an S-Class mage on his first attempt and, according to rumors, defeating Gildarts Clive in combat, a feat very few could accomplish, especially at that age. Upon hearing that a fairy tale member was capable of taking on Naruto-san, the blonde paled considerably. She had been researching the various guilds, even Phantom Lord, to decide which would be the best fit for her, and had come across Fairy Tail's exploits. Strong, overly enthusiastic, and reckless, Fairy Tail had a less than flattering track record. They destroyed everything in their path every time they accepted a job. Add to that the news about their constant fights, and it was easy to understand why she was so afraid of them. Lisana nodded, giving Naruto a mischievous smile. Yes, he's quite strong. That's probably why he's his. A very valuable person, Naruto interrupted gently, earning an annoyed look from his student. He easily ignored it and turned his gaze to his new classmate. Don't worry about Setsuna-chan, Lucy, he said. She may seem cold and quiet, but that's just how she is. Lisana puffed out her cheeks. You say that, but she always gets so animated when you show up. Naruto-sensei, you're a bad influence on people. A loud laugh escaped her lips. That's what the girl who knew more about intimacy than Macau itself says. How old were you then? 10, 11, 12? You were already corrupted when I came in, so blaming me for your perverted tendencies seems ridiculous. The conversation continued in that vein, with Naruto and Lisana recounting their respective exploits in the guild, while Lucy chimed in with any questions she had. The train journey soon ended, and before they knew it, they were standing in front of the gates of the famous guild in Magnolia. Standing in front of the tall doors, Lucy swallowed nervously and excitedly. Finally, after so many years, I'm finally here. Gripping the doorknob tightly, she yanked the doors open as Naruto, Lisana, Happy, and Natsu followed. Upon entering the grand hall, a huge smile lit up her face. Fairy Tail was a hive of activity. Everywhere she looked, she saw people laughing, talking, drinking, and generally interacting with each other. She gasped when she spotted several famous mages. Kana Alberona, who was currently downing what must have been a liter of alcohol in one gulp. Grey Fullbuster, the guild's only god slayer and a strong contender for the title of Fairy Tail's strongest man. Even the notorious Beast God, Elfman, was relaxing in a nearby seat, chatting quietly with Lisana and Natsu. Dazed, Lucy spun her head around like a child in a new and exciting world, making her way through the crowd. Naruto watched Lucy walk away toward the others and shook his head in amusement. Lisana, he called, catching her attention. Would you mind showing Lucy how everything works? I have something to tell Master, and it's very important that he knows as soon as possible. Lisana smiled and nodded happily. No problem, Naruto-sensei. Thank you, Naruto said, nodding in appreciation. He headed for the stairs that led to Makarov's office. As he quietly made his way through the crowd, his classmates greeted him enthusiastically and cheered as he passed. Despite the pleasant smile that lit up his face, Naruto sighed inwardly at the excessive attention he always received. How ironic. What I longed for so much as a child is now what bothers me the most. As he climbed the stairs, Naruto glanced at Kana and caught the attention of the beautiful brunette. Waving cheerfully, Naruto smiled as he saw her light up considerably and raise her half-empty beer bottle in a silent, questioning gesture. Nodding in response to his invitation, Naruto continued on his way to Makarov's office. Makarov's office. Many years had passed since the arrival of Naruto Uzumaki and Setsuna Uchiha, and Makarov could honestly say that those had been the most interesting years the guild had ever experienced. Of course, there had been ups and downs along the way, especially with Laxus. The elderly guild master frowned as his mind drifted back to his grandson. The report he'd been reading a moment ago slipped from his grasp as he became distracted. Since that S-Class exam, Laxus had become even more unbearable. He only obeyed orders when absolutely necessary, looked down on anyone who wasn't an S-class mage, and rarely held back when confronting other guild members, however. The most serious problem was his incredibly passionate and unsettling rivalry with Naruto. Whenever they met, it could start with something as simple as a greeting, and the situation would quickly escalate into a fight, though most of the time it was Laxus who started it. Makarov didn't know what to make of this complicated relationship, and with Gildarts away on his 100-year mission, he doubted the guild could prevent them from getting into a full-blown brawl. Where did all this begin? Was it Ivan's excommunication that triggered this change in Laxus? Or had these feelings always been with him, hidden behind a shell? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and he instantly smiled. "Come in, Naruto. It's open," he called out. Who else knocked before entering his office? Most barged in unannounced, and the polite ones only announced their presence when they were practically inside. As expected, the door opened and Naruto appeared. Upon entering the office, Naruto greeted him with a slight military salute. "Hello, Jichan. Do you have a minute?" he asked. Makarov seemed slightly amused. "My son, if I didn't have time for you, I would have told you as soon as you knocked on my door." Naruto nodded once and sat down across from Makarov. "So, it turns out I ran into Layla Hart-Filia's daughter today," he said, watching Makarov straighten up with interest. If you recall, Layla was the wife of Jude Hart-Filia, the current owner of the powerful, multi-billion-dollar Hart-Filia Kozern organization. According to my sources, he's asked several guilds to find and rescue his daughter. His gaze became piercing. He's offering 20 million jewels as a reward, along with some rare magical items. Makarov narrowed his eyes. "So that's why she sent me the summons to inform me about Miss Lucy." "So you're saying that?" "Yes. With the request to return Lucy Heartfelt of Fairy Tale to her father circulating among various guilds, it's highly likely that rival guilds will try to retaliate, especially Phantom Lord," he said. Crossing his arms, Naruto continued, "It's very likely they'll attack us with everything they've got and justify it as a necessary action to fulfill the request. Not only would we dethrone them from their position as the strongest guild, but having Lucy among us would give us a huge amount of resources at our disposal." Makarov frowned grimly. "That's truly worrying. If Jose attacks us, he could concoct a story that makes us look bad, something the Magic Council would believe without question. We also can't abandon Lucy. She sought us out. She has a genuine desire to join us, and she could be a wonderful addition to the family." He grumbled, wondering why all these problems seemed to plague his guild. Naruto nodded and stood up. "Although I'm sure it's still quite a while before that happens, it wouldn't hurt to think about countermeasures against an attack." Turning around, the blond man left the office, leaving Makarov alone to ponder this new turn of events. Guild Hall. Naruto sat at the bar with a beer in his hand, listening to Kana talk about her day and the interesting things that had happened at the guild while he'd been away. At that moment, Laxus and his Thunder God tribe were off on one of the toughest S-class missions. Urza had left on an assignment just a day after him, and Mikao still hadn't returned from his latest job. "Really? I thought I'd be back by now," Naruto said, taking a long swig of beer. He grimaced as he tasted it, but still downed another glass. Kana shrugged, her jug of liquor at her side, taking a long swig. "He's usually back on time, so it's strange he hasn't returned yet," she said, looking at him with concern. "Romeo's really worried about his father, and the boys at his school aren't making it easy for him." Naruto's expression tightened, but he continued drinking. Scaring preteens to death would give a bad impression to the civilians, and, besides, it would make him look like a hypocrite in Natsu's eyes. "So you're busy tonight?" he asked, looking her straight in the eyes. Kana hummed thoughtfully, trying to hide how pleased she was by the question and the possible next one. "No, I have enough work for this month, so I don't need to accept job applications." "Why?" Naruto looked at her with a blank expression. "You should already know I'm asking you out. It's been a while since we've had fun alone, without worries and without anyone watching us. Naruto said, leaning back in his seat. Kana gave him a mischievous smile. Well, well, you're quite direct about what you want. What would Setsuna-chan say if she heard her S-class lover saying these things? She joked. They both burst into laughter. She'd probably tell me to have a good time and to make something special for dinner when I got back, Naruto said, setting his empty glass on the wooden counter. Approaching Kana, he gently took her hands and began to play with them. It was something he did unconsciously, a habit he'd absorbed from the mini shinobi, but one he barely remembered. Mira-Jane and Kana might tease him about it, but he knew they enjoyed his touch too. Kana smiled at him, enjoying the gentle caress of his hands on hers. Well, I suppose I could. But can we postpone it for 3 days? She asked, her eyes sparkling with delight at how adorable Naruto looked at that moment. Naruto tilted his head, a gesture so similar to that of a domestic dog that Kana had to stifle a squeal. What's wrong? Is something the matter? She asked. Kana nodded. Yes, the church where I used to stay is having a birthday party for the twins, Micah and Sammy. Since I've known them for quite some time, I decided to catch up with them by attending. It's tonight, and I have some experiments and errands to run tomorrow, so the day after tomorrow is the closest free day I have. Naruto clicked his tongue. Damn it, and I was hoping to spend more time with you. Running a hand through his hair, he picked up another glass. Well, I don't blame you. Pouring himself another generous portion of beer, Naruto raised his glass once more. Cheers. Time skip, the next day? The day had started as usual. Naruto woke up early and headed straight to the guild in search of any interesting jobs. Setsuna had accepted an S-rank job while he was away, and the place felt strangely quiet without her. Upon entering his personal study, Naruto approached a section of the wall and traced an intricate symbol. Instantly, the illusion vanished, and he found himself before 4 swords proudly displayed on wooden shelves. Kubikaribiku, Samahata, Tetsusaiga, and Bakasega. 2 forged from his own fangs, the other 2 relics from his past. Before he could move, a deep, masculine voice growled. Naruto-sama, why haven't you called me this past month? Even that damn shark got her turn, and she doesn't even know how to kill properly. Another voice echoed, calm and colder than ice. Silence, cutthroat. Naruto-sama has no obligation to please you, nor should you ever presume that your bloodlust takes precedence over his reasons for choosing which of us accompanies him. But Kasega's regal and icy voice was, surprisingly, feminine. It reminded him a little of Setsuna and Kurami's, so he had the habit of striking up conversations with her just to hear her speak. Samahata writhed in her position, and her convulsions were the only sign of her amusement. Tell him, blast Fong. Show him that girls can kick ass. Naruto stifled a sigh and stopped paying attention to the argument his blades were having with each other. Through constant exposure to his powerful chakra, Kubikarabocho had evolved. Much like Samahata, it had acquired the ability to absorb an infinite amount of iron from those it cut, and in addition to using the iron to repair itself, it could release the excess blood in the form of razor-sharp projectiles capable of slicing through virtually anything. It had gained consciousness, somehow adopting Mamachi Zabuza's demeanor, a fitting course of action, he supposed. His other 2 swords, Bakasega and Tetsusaiga, were special, even for Naruto. Bakasega was so powerful that he rarely used it in combat. Its energy blasts acted like a potent poison, the effects of which spread upon contact. Tetsusaiga, the last masculine sword, was the Fong of destruction. Even the damage a Bijudama could inflict was matched, and in some cases surpassed, by the destruction unleashed by its second Fong. Before the argument could escalate, Naruto swiftly drew Bakasega and resealed the blades, ignoring the other's complaints. As they vanished behind the wall, he gazed at Bakasega and smiled. Unsheathing it, Naruto examined it with his eyes and grinned maliciously. It may look a bit old-fashioned, but I must say I've never seen a sword that embodies both perfection and lethality. Bakasega's blade flashed briefly as she strutted under his praise. It shouldn't surprise you, though I appreciate your words, Naruto-sama. While I am curious why you chose me this time, I believe you have other things to do. How right you are, my dear, he murmured. Deftly sheathing it, Naruto secured it to his back and headed towards the guild. In a matter of minutes, he was standing in front of the guild doors. As he entered the hall, a glimpse of beautiful white hair brought a smile to his face. Hidden stealthily in a corner of the room, Naruto peeked out to look at the person and smiled. Mira Jane had returned. Upon spotting the Strauss siblings' distinctive white hair, Naruto ducked and remained hidden, plotting a surprise. From his hiding place behind the large table in the corner of the room, his eyes gleamed mischievously as he watched Mira Jane deep in conversation with her younger sister. Oh, this looks promising. After performing 3 hand seals in the blink of an eye, Naruto cast the Maisegakure no Jutsu camouflage technique. His form changed, using his chakra to become transparent. His clothes, sword, and scent vanished as the jutsu completed. After congratulating himself on his victory, Naruto nodded contentedly before slipping out of his hiding place. Since it was still early, around 6 o'clock, there were only a few people in the guild. He caught a glimpse of Gray at the other end of the room, conversing with the elderly fire mage Mikao, who was unconsciously shaping ice sculptures with his hands, though he was clearly paying more attention to the conversation. As the conversation went on, the sculptures changed. At times they resembled the imposing figure of Elfman, and the next moment Urza clad in her heavenly wheel armor. Naruto smiled at that. Gray was like a much kinder version of Sasuke, like the Uchiha could have been if he hadn't been so obsessed with revenge. He learned the various Hyuton techniques Naruto had taught him quite well. He didn't master them as quickly as Sasuke, but he was very thorough in studying every detail of the technique. Weaknesses, strengths, methods for improving it. He was undoubtedly one of his best students. With his magical ability, her gaze shifted toward the sound of laughter coming from the northeast corner of the room. The laughter was coming from Kana, who already had a mug of beer in her hand and was chatting animatedly with one of the new recruits, a woman named Biska Mulan. She was a young woman with long, straight, green hair that reached her waist, with bangs framing her face. She had brownish-purple eyes and always wore red lipstick. She had a curvy figure and wore a cowboy hat, a light polka-dotted scarf, and reddish-brown boots. She wore a short, strapless dress decorated with spiral patterns and darker striped edges. From what he could gather from their brief interactions, as well as the information Kana had provided, she seemed to be a soft-spoken young woman. The only times he'd seen her lively and active were when she was practicing her weapon magic and when she was spending time with Kana. He'd caught her glancing at him a few times, but since nothing came of it, he didn't think much of it. A smile spread across his face as a very lascivious idea occurred to him. But Kasega, who was still tied to his side and synchronized with him, sighed deeply. Naruto-sama, while it's not my place to criticize your behavior, don't you think you're acting more perverted than ever? What you're planning seems more like something a man with his other head would do than someone like you. Naruto stroked the area gently, making sure to move around and avoid the people who were slowly entering the guild. A quick glance confirmed that Lisana and Mira Jane were still deep in conversation, though they had moved to the bar. Forgive me if I seem like a pervert, but you must remember that I inherited an enormous libido from all my acquaintances. Besides, I don't intend to go beyond a second, he said with a certain cheekiness. He started moving toward them, stealthily dodging anyone who got in his way. In a matter of seconds, he was right behind the green-haired girl, who was laughing at a joke Kana had just told her. Careful that his hair didn't touch her bare skin, Naruto leaned down until he could admire her impressive cleavage. Wow, they're almost as big as Urzus, he thought, watching how they moved with each step. Naruto-sama, are you really going to do this? But Kasega already seemed resigned to her master subjecting the young woman to a lewd joke, but she still tried to stop him without much enthusiasm. What if you get caught and discovered? Naruto rubbed his chin as he leaned over to observe her breasts from different angles. Yes, I really am going to do it. No, They won't catch me or discover me. And just so you know, I have an escape plan just in case. Now, would you mind keeping quiet for a moment?" His eyes transformed into the Sharingan, which he then used like a camera. Whenever Biska struck an involuntarily sensual pose, his eyes captured the moment and stored it in his mind forever. Feeling a surge of boldness and mischief, Naruto silently removed his glove and gently brushed his hand along her right arm. She jumped, nearly spilling her teacup and causing her breasts to bounce even more. His eyes, fixed on her chest, captured the moment and replayed it in slow motion in his mind. Kana had just finished her mug of beer when her companion sat up abruptly and turned her head to the side. The brunette, raising an eyebrow, tilted her head curiously. "Is something wrong, Biska?" Biska nervously rubbed her arm, still looking uneasy. "I felt something touch me. It's probably just my imagination, maybe just the breeze," she said, giving Kana a half-hearted smile. That answer made Naruto smile maliciously beneath his mask. "Oh, really? I'd love to keep playing with her, but I have a sexy demon to capture." Shadow Clone Jutsu. Half a dozen clones appeared beside her, all of them also under the effects of the Maisegakure no Jutsu. Each one gave her a military salute and lunged at the unsuspecting woman. I was looking forward to them dissipating and showing the results. Heading towards the bar, the still invisible shinobi slipped through the crowd and positioned himself directly behind the conquest mage, who was sitting on the stool farthest from the guild next to her sister. Mira Jane listened intently as Lee Sena spoke about the training methods she had implemented with her group and how well she was absorbing them. She hadn't changed much. She still wore her usual outfit, though now she sported a striking choker. Her figure had become even more curvaceous and feminine, much like most of the women in the guild. As for her personality, it had mellowed with age, and she was, in some ways, a more subdued version of herself. She could be very cheerful and sweet with her loved ones, but quite brusque with those she didn't know well or disliked. Her rivalry with Urza remained, revealing glimpses of her old personality when they clashed over the guild, but it was clearly less intense than when they were children. Leaning towards her, Naruto's hands twitched with anticipation. With the speed of a viper, his hands slithered forward and grasped Mirajane's large breasts. Holding them firmly, Naruto took a moment to admire once more those incredibly soft yet perky breasts in his palm. Despite having done far more naughty and perverted things to them, every time he caressed those magnificent breasts, he felt a certain thrill. Dahyuho had it. Being with her, knowing that she had chosen him above all others to undress before him. The moment passed quickly, and knowing he only had one more second to act, he pinched her sensitive spots. Normally this wouldn't affect her, but their encounters in the alcove last time had lasted practically all day. Her body had become extremely sensitive as a result of a particular intimate technique Kakashi knew about, and the effects wouldn't wear off until that night. His reaction did not disappoint. "Kaya, Mirane," Lisana shouted, startled by her sister's sudden scream. Naruto chuckled as he deactivated his camouflage jutsu, appearing out of nowhere like a chameleon behind the siblings, who stared at him in surprise. "Hey Mira, it's been a while." When she glared at him, her cheeks burning and her chest clutching as if it were exposed, he raised an eyebrow. "Huh? You seem pretty upset, Mira-chan. Did something go wrong with your assignment?" "Shut up, Baka Naruto." He dodged the blow she threw, noticing she had attacked half-heartedly, and a flicker of amusement filled him. Grabbing her arm before she could pull it away, he took advantage of her surprise and pulled her close. She sprang to her feet and pressed her chest against his. He wrapped his arms around her in an unexpected embrace, squeezing her close with the excitement of a puppy. "Mira-chan, I missed you so much," he exclaimed, snuggling up to her like a dog. Mira Jane slapped him across the chest, her cheeks still flushed with embarrassment. "Maybe if you'd been quicker with that job application, you could have come with me," she said, surrendering to his embrace and wrapping her arms around him. She tried to deny it, but she knew she'd missed him too. The round trip to Balsam Village had been terribly boring and frustrating. Frustrating because several men had harassed her, thinking she was easy prey when all she wanted was to rest and get home as soon as possible. She dealt with them, though without using force. A concentrated burst of murderous intent had left them deeply disturbed and afraid to come near again. She hugged him tighter as his scent enveloped her. He smelled of mint, as if he'd put on cologne just before arriving. "What would you do without me?" she asked, laughing, snuggling closer to him. He gently stroked her hair, commenting once again on its silkiness. "Crawl to a corner and cry until you come looking for me," he replied in a soft, sweet voice. He buried his face in her hair and inhaled her scent, feeling as if he could spend the rest of the day holding her. For him, that would be more satisfying than just intimacy, though combining the two certainly topped the list. "Please, get a room," Lisanna exclaimed, trying her hardest to avoid eye contact with the couple. However, the blush on her cheeks shattered her act of disgruntled little sister. The scene was far too intimate for her liking. There was nothing unusual about their embrace, but the intensity of the display made her feel like a mere spectator. Watching them happy together, simply by being in each other's presence, was something she considered too intimate to witness. Naruto reluctantly lifted his head from Mirajane's soft, wonderful body to look questioningly at Lisanna. "Didn't you and Natsu go further? You seemed quite comfortable giving Harjin a handjob on the way, so why are you embarrassed by a little cuddling?" The question was phrased with too much innocence to be anything but a joke. As expected, Mirajane turned her head toward Lisanna in surprise as the younger sister cursed her sensei, who blinked innocently. "Revenge is sweet, isn't it, Lisanna?" "What did you do to Natsu?" Mirajane whispered furiously, searching the guild for the pink-haired dragon slayer. Frowning when she didn't see him, she pulled away from her lover and turned her stormy blue eyes toward Lisanna, her hands on her hips. "Explain yourself, dear sister. How long has this been going on, and why have you been doing these things if you're clearly not ready for it?" she asked quietly, her eyes gleaming slightly with anger. "Mirane, I can explain," Lisanna said, raising her hands to try and calm her older sister. She shot a glare at Naruto, who simply waved cheerfully from behind Mira and quickly began to explain. "I know it sounds weird, but we haven't gone beyond kissing and a little touching. When we were traveling to Harjin, I had a book with me, a pretty racy one." Her voice dropped as she nervously fidgeted with her fingers, and the blush on her cheeks deepened as she confessed. "And I got a little turned on by the content. Oh my god, how embarrassing. Damn you, Naruto-sensei. I hope you're left wanting." "I know. I can hear you perfectly every night when you're reading one of those books and getting all worked up," Mirajane said dryly, making Lisanna squeal in embarrassment. Mira tilted her head. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? You know you're not exactly quiet when you're engrossed in a book." What? Naruto, observing the reprimand from a distance, smiled at the scene. Despite her anger, the woman still radiated that maternal tenderness that many mature women possess, even those who have only recently reached adulthood. He felt a strange knot in his chest as he witnessed the scene. As he continued to watch her, the feeling intensified. Closing his eyes, he imagined a slightly older Mirajane sternly scolding a white-haired young man who seemed embarrassed and annoyed by the reprimand. She wore a sleeveless, ankle-length maroon dress with a pleated skirt. A large pink bow adorned her bodice, and trim of the same color framed the generous neckline like straps and extended to her waist. She wore heels that matched the dress, a small chain necklace with an oval blue gem, and a white flower bracelet on her right wrist. The young man was quite muscular, though his body appeared slender like Naruto's. He wore a long coat, black, purple, and red, with the fairy tale emblem embroidered on both shoulders. Underneath the coat, he wore a red zip-up hoodie, a navy blue tank top, and dark blue pants. He had white hair styled downwards and blue eyes, similar to those of Mirajane and the other Strauss siblings. Mira sighed resignedly and hugged the man, who pretended to be ashamed of the gesture, like any other son. The imagined scene filled his heart with something. He wasn't sure what it was: longing? Perhaps nostalgia? He no longer knew how he felt about having a family. On the one hand, it was something he had always longed for since childhood. Having been an only child, he had always desired a large family and the opportunity to raise a child. Now, armed with the memories and advice of over 100 capable fathers, he was quite confident in his ability to be a good dad. However, any of his children would be considered a source of power. He wasn't entirely certain, but he suspected that each and every one of his children would inherit a significant portion of his powers. If they inherited the most dangerous bloodlines he possessed, the Magic Council and others would covet his family. If so, the children's lives would be marked by paranoia, and they would rarely find happiness. I hated him. However, when he opened his eyes, he recognized a fact. Someday I would be a good mother. Thank goodness Mikau and Wakaba aren't here, he thought, narrowing his eyes as he remembered the two older mages. Since Mira Jane had grown into a dazzling young woman, they felt they could now take advantage of the person who had bullied them as a child. Naruto didn't entirely disagree with their reasoning. Unlike before, when they saw her as a child or an annoying little sister, now they saw her as a dazzling young woman and simply acted on their natural instinct to procreate. Naruto always responded with his instinct to protect his pack, violently. Noticing his change in mood, Mira Jane interrupted her little lecture long enough to take him by the shoulders and give him a chaste kiss on the cheek. She didn't know what was troubling him, but she knew him well enough to know that he calmed down whenever she, Kana, or Setsuna kissed him on the cheek. Returning to scolding her little sister, her mind turned to pondering the relationship between her rival and her lover. Having been Urza's friend practically since they were kids, Mira was one of the few people in the guild who suspected the S-class mage's dark past. From what little Urza had told her, and what she'd managed to deduce on her own, and with the master's help, Mira Jane had tentatively concluded that Urza had been in love with, or at least attracted to, the boy, and had been cruelly rejected. There were also hints that she'd been tortured, as evidenced by her implanted right eye, as well as the initial terror she felt upon seeing a whip when she first arrived at the guild. With all those experiences, it was no wonder she continued to wear her armor. It was her defense mechanism, something that made her feel safe even when she didn't need it, like when she went to sleep. Of course, Setsuna, Kana, and Mira had noticed when the Fairy Queen began to look at the Demon King with romantic eyes. Interestingly, it all started with one of their usual sparring matches. Urza had challenged Naruto once again, something many believed Natsu had instilled in her, and they had fought just a few meters from the guild. Urza said nothing about it, though she blushed intensely and adopted a surprisingly sweet demeanor, but it was obvious that something had changed in her perception of the strange S-class mage. Mira Jane and Kana believed that something happened that afternoon that opened her eyes to the possibility of being with Naruto. Setsuna, on the other hand, thought that Urza had always been infatuated with Naruto and felt a great affection for him, and that what happened that day only allowed her to finally admit her feelings for him. From then on, it became a little more obvious that she considered him someone very dear. Whenever she accepted a job that required more staff than she could provide, he was the first person she asked to accompany her. When she needed to vent, Naruto would take her for a walk, and she could open her heart to him. That didn't mean he was the only one she confided in, but he was practically the only boy her age with whom she let her guard down. Every compliment he gave her, something he rarely did, brought a brief smile to her face, one she savored. It was funny how, in a way, he was encouraging his rival to admit his feelings for his lover, although, deep down, it all came down to his inner romantic side eager to bring them together. Again, snowman lying down with ice. Again, eat shit, donkey rapist. Again, what the hell are you saying, brother? Again, you heard me, you damn marshmallow toaster. Again, the sound of fists hitting flesh echoed through the hall, and many eyes turned toward its source. In the center of the guild, Natsu and Gray were locked in a fierce battle. Punches and kicks flew at each other at breakneck speeds, striking everything in their path in their eagerness to injure one another. The audience cheered them on, watching the fight intently. Gray employed the Goken fighting style to charge at his opponent, while Natsu, true to his street fighting style, used his flames to power up his blows. Naruto sighed wearily at the everyday scene. Why do they never get along? He cracked one eye open, observing the various flaws in both of their fighting styles and pondering possible ways to correct them. Only after Natsu punched Gray in the face, sending him stumbling back a few inches, did he remember the task he had set out to accomplish. She'd have to give Natsu a little lecture about his adult adventures. He and Lee-sana were of legal age, yes, but that didn't mean they were ready for the adult activities that existed. Sure, he'd slept with Mira-Jane, Kana, and Setsuna, but they were at least 2 years older than the couple and had taken their relationship slowly. Damn it, he didn't want his lover to be an aunt before she was ready. What's going on here? Naruto turned toward the familiar voice, smiled at Lucy, who was staring at him in astonishment, and greeted her with a small gesture. She was wearing a cute red t-shirt that accentuated her ample bust, a pink miniskirt that reached her thighs, and a custom belt cinched at the waist. She seemed to have abandoned her whip, and the golden fairy tale mark on the back of her right hand shone proudly in the light. This is something you'll have to get used to in this industry. At that moment, just as the fight was about to escalate rapidly and involve the other members of the guild, a cry of warning and fear echoed through the room. Hey, you idiots! Clear the area. Urza's coming this way. Loke, the scout from back then, looked as if he'd seen hell itself and wanted nothing to do with it. He was one of the newest recruits, a skilled practitioner of ring magic. Interestingly, Loke had been voted the third most desirable man in Sorcerer magazine's The Wizard I'd Like to Be My Boyfriend ranking, while second and first place went to Seagrain, one of the youngest and most charismatic members of the Magic Council, and Naruto, respectively. Loke complained, ranting that he was far more handsome than the Demon King and deserved a higher ranking. To settle the dispute, 2 sorcerer reporters arrived to judge and determine who was the most handsome. Loke was so confident of his victory that he didn't hesitate to strip naked in front of the 2 judges. They awarded him an overall score of 9.5, which he believed Naruto couldn't possibly surpass. Naruto simply removed his mask, and the women were knocked unconscious by nosebleeds. In the next issue, an image of Naruto appeared, teasing readers with part of his mask uncovered. The sales they achieved with that issue would forever remain their best record. Loke and almost every other man who read that issue felt deeply discouraged. The frenzy that followed the declaration could only be described as chaos. The people in the room were paralyzed with surprise, obviously not expecting the guild discipline to return so soon. Natsu and Gray were the most paralyzed. They were comically frozen in place, with Natsu's fist poised to rise and Gray's foot about to release. When they finally grasped the situation, chaos erupted. Natsu and Gray stormed out of the guild at the same time, one to defeat Urza and the other to witness her humiliation. As the others scrambled to get themselves together, muffled shouts and the thud of blows could be heard above the commotion, urging them to move faster. A few moments later, the guild fell into a tense silence, and Minnie grew nervous at the ominous echo of her footsteps as she approached the doors. Finally, after a few anxious moments, the doors burst open, and Urza Scarlet entered the guild. Like everyone else in the guild, Urza had changed over the years. She had grown into a very beautiful woman. She had a slender figure that Naruto described as amazing, and like most of the women in the guild, she had developed a generous and voluptuous bust, as well as an attractive backside. She had let her hair grow long at some point, though it probably started when he made it clear that he preferred women with long hair. Her usual attire consisted of armor custom made by the Heart Cruise blacksmiths, a blue skirt, and black boots. In his hands, which barely managed to pass through the doors without hindrance, he held an enormous horn. It closely resembled a dragon's claw, though it was adorned with all manner of jewels and decorative materials. Lucy gasped at the nonchalant ease with which the redhead carried the enormous horn. It was one thing to hear about the incredible feats that each of the best fairy tale wizards had accomplished over the years, but to actually see Titania Urza carrying that huge thing as if she were holding a pen, without using her magical armor to enhance her abilities, was impressive. It was then that she decided Urza would be her role model. Of course, she admired Mira Jane and, to a lesser extent, Kana, but Urza embodied the concept of a mage. She was powerful, strong, very responsible and courteous, beautiful and attractive without any special effort. She was like a celestial being. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the size of the horn, while Mira Jane smiled brightly at her rival. If a third party, unconnected to fairy tale, had been asked to describe the relationship between the two based on that conversation, many would have described them as close friends. "Welcome back, Urza. The master is in an emergency meeting and won't be back for about 3 days," she replied. Urza frowned briefly. "I see. I was hoping to surprise him before he got busy, but oh well." As she placed the enormous horn on the ground, a loud thud echoed through the guild. Some of the newer members, including Lucy, gasped even more as they calculated the weight she had been carrying. Urza, brushing some dust from her greaves, glanced at the crowd and sighed sadly. "I was really looking forward to disciplining you all when I got back, but something unexpected came up, so I'll make sure to do it as soon as I return." At her words, all the men, except Naruto and Elfman, clutched their groins in pain and paled, while some of the girls took a few steps back, discomfort etched on their faces. Lucy watched the crowd's reaction with curiosity, wondering why Urza Scarlet had so easily frightened the members of one of the most powerful guilds. Turning to Naruto, her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Naruto, why are they so afraid of her? I mean, yes, she's one of the strongest mages in the guild, but they seem more nervous than usual." Naruto shrugged. "She has a reputation for being strict, and some of her punishments can be quite severe. It also helps that Kurami found her interesting enough to teach her." From what she had heard, Kurami had taught Urza a few things, although it wasn't yet clear exactly what she had taught her. Satisfied with having terrified them, Urza turned to Naruto and stepped forward to greet him. "So you're finally back, huh? I heard about your little getaway to Harjan." She smiled mockingly as he flinched slightly and crossed her arms as she stopped in front of him. "It was Natsu's fault, damn it. Makarov won't be happy, but he won't refuse to pay for the damages caused to the village." He leaned against the wall, watching her with interest. "How's the job application going?" Urza grimaced and shifted her weight to her other foot. "Actually, I'm not lucky enough to be able to tell that story. Look, are you busy the rest of the day?" Mira Jane frowned. "I'm sorry, but I was just planning to rest today and maybe spend some time with Naruto tomorrow." "What's wrong? Do you need help with something?" "Something like that," Urza replied vaguely. "There's something I wanted to discuss with Naruto and the master, but I suppose I'll have to settle for you." Somehow, Naruto got the feeling that she was strangely pleased to be working only with him. "I had a feeling that, in the end, I might miss my date with Kana." Ashibana City. A young woman walked with a light, energetic stride through the streets of Ashibana. Her bright red hair billowed in the wind like a magnificent mane in the sunlight. I wonder if the leader would mind if I had a little fun here before going after the objective." Of course, that would depend on whether or not the wizards of Eisenwald lived to see the next day. After all, one cannot anger the bloody angel and get away with it. Urza gritted her teeth as she locked swords with the strange woman before her, battling the fearsome power the unknown mage wielded. Not even her purgatory armor offered her any advantage in the duel. "Who are you, and why have you killed everyone?" she growled, focusing all her strength on achieving a draw. Her opponent grinned, revealing several sharp teeth that were anything but human. "And I'm supposed to just tell you what you want to know like that? Sorry, but I don't work that way." Urza began speaking as the woman's left eye started glowing with a murderous purple light. "Hiration no Jutsu." Naraku chuckled as he gazed at the crystal in his hands. With this, I'll have over 300 demons under my command and control. There's still not enough to face Kyuka and the others, but there's certainly enough for what comes next. Poor Mirajane and Lisena. They must feel terrible for not knowing their real father. Grasping the sword that hung on the cave wall, the former wizard and madman turned toward his destination. Don't worry, my dear children. Dad is coming for a family reunion. Natsu crashed into the wall, exhausted after using his last attack. The force of his most powerful Morning Peacock attack had hurled him against the walls of the Ghost Lord's Guild. As he slowly but surely got up from the rubble, he winced in pain as his hands spasmed from time to time. Natsu, glancing across the room, frowned at the lack of any sign of the Iron Dragon Slayer. A cautious sniff answered his unspoken question. A green light pierced the dust, causing Natsu to grunt and tense up instantly. Well, for a brat like you, you can certainly do more than anyone I've fought before. Emerging from the cloud of dust with a wild grin on his face, Gajeel Red Fox cracked his neck a few times. Unfortunately for you, it's time to end this. Iron attack. Cursing Gajeel's drastic increase in magic levels, Natsu stood firm with a jubilant grin. How curious. You took the words right out of my mouth. Fire impregnated. Shodame-sama, Uchiha Itachi has been arrested. Senju Hashirama, leader of the Leaf Empire, turned swiftly to greet the ANBU agent who delivered the news with a crooked smile. Excellent. Have Tobarama and Orochimaru begin the extraction of his Sharingan immediately. Understood. As the ANBU member faded away, Hashirama's fingers twitched rapidly as he contained the euphoria that coursed through his entire being. As he gazed upon Emperor's Mountain, his wavy eyes gleamed with an ominous, otherworldly purple light. Soon the Kyuubi will be in my hands, and then, at last, I will be whole. Naruto looked at the woman in front of him with considerable caution. She smiled, tilting her head slightly as she watched her Sharingan spin furiously. What's wrong with you? I already told you I have no ill intentions. Naruto snorted. And why would I trust the word of a Daybreak member? Last time that happened, 3 people died. She stepped forward, her red hair caressed by the gentle breeze. Because I have information that you and my goddaughter need to hear. Without it, I fear you'll both be completely lost in the coming storm.